You ready for this?
Gonna be fun.
You will not stand in my way.
Frostborn. Hunger. This pleases me.
I do not fear you, mortal.
Your soul shall be mine.
Don't make me laugh.
Who needs a brew? Oh, I do. Feel a shredding, baby. Let the battle begin.
So hello and welcome to Trollin HGC episode 30, a Heroes of the Storm podcast focused on eSports and a member of the Trolls.gg Entertainment Network. I'm your host, LiQuid, and I'm joined today as usual by Bahgz. How's it going, man?
What's up? I'm smooth, not a robot. We got Khaldor here. I spoke
Right?
again.
We got Khaldor with us. This is awesome. I don't know. Khaldor, if you didn't see last week, he had internet problems and was a robot the entire episode.
Oh yeah, I had that problem in the past myself. That's always a fun one.
Gilly had a good laugh about that. So, before we jump into the show, I do want to real quick thank our patrons over at Trolls, patreon.com/TrollsGG. That is our overall TrollsGG Entertainment Network Patreon. Share that with all the shows and all the content. If you're looking for a way to support us, that is a great way to do so. And one of those supporters is Hoofit. He is a writer for us. He hangs out in our Discord. He's always around to chat and to watch the show. So thank you, Hoofit. He's focusing on EU actually. So this is his show tonight. So awesome. And all right, man. Let's jump into some quick news items real quick.
Tonight on the Trolls.gg Podcast Network, Trollin HGC proudly presents Heroes eSports News, Notes, and Drama with your hosts, LiQuiud and Bahgz.
Okay, so a little-known team named Ballistics is keeping their team. That probably didn't come out the way I wanted it to, but that's okay. Ballistics re-signed their roster and is keeping that team through 2018 in Korea, which is awesome news. They will not be L5 again. They will be Ballistics for 2018. Looking forward to seeing if they can improve and dethrone the old MVP Black team, now KSV. Also today, some news that I was involved in and I'm super happy about. Heroes Hype has launched Open Division for 2018. It was with Gosu Gamers last year. This year, it's going to be Heroes Hype doing both EU and NA Open Division games. Already set up and announced this morning. And yeah, it's incredible news. And so far, the reaction has been mostly positive about that. I don't think I've seen any negative news about that. So
The other change is they're going to be doing Open Division the same day.
yes,
on the same week instead of alternating weeks. So
absolutely. So Monday the 29th is Open Division for EU and NA, both one day. So, and then in NA news, Simplicity, new team formed from the Memphis Grizzlies, and Jed Kaplan, I think that's right, picked up the Old Gods roster, so they will be playing as Simplicity this weekend. And then some caster news. J-House joining NA caster in Phase 1, and Gilly and Dredd are going to split Phase 1. Gilly doing pre-clash and Dredd doing post-clash. And then G-Clef and Wolf are returning for Korean HGC.
This is like the moment when I think about how much I can troll, because the funniest reason that I heard why we have the change for North America is that Gilly's pregnant. So
yes, baby weed.
we had a pretty big laugh about that. Like, I talked to her shortly after I saw that, and we had quite a bit of fun there. And she immediately said, like, oh yeah, of course, guys, didn't you know I'm pregnant? I'm gonna name the kid after whoever is the nicest to me this season of you guys. I asked her if I can tweet that, and she was immediately just like, hell no, not gonna happen. So yeah, she of course immediately shut that rumor down, but that was a fun one. That was actually like a really fun explanation when I saw that.
Yeah, she tweeted about it later. No, I'm not pregnant. I'm not having a little baby weed. And I'm like, that's an awesome name though, calling it baby weed. So yeah. But no, it's cool. I'm happy also G-Clef and Wolf are back. I watched all of Korea last season. I'll watch all of it again this year. So that's awesome that they're sticking together. And then one of the players actually said he was also casting. He was doing the Korean. I totally went blank on who that was. Chat probably knows. He tweeted about it yesterday. So and and I was pretty excited about that. But now I'm going blank.
I know Hong Kono is going to be casting.
That's who it was.
Korean cast in Korea.
Yes, Hong Kono, and Kala's getting it right out of chat too. Yes, that's who it was. All right, let's get ready to actually interview Khaldor, because that's what everybody's really here to see. All right, Bahgz, go for it, man.
All right, Khaldor, thank you for joining the show, man. Appreciate that.
Pleasure.
I just before we get started though, I wanted to bring something up. I don't know if you remember. I'm the guy that was a little too shy to say hi to you at BlizzCon, like the day before the show happened. My buddy actually from Bolivia had to go up and be like, "Hey man, this guy wants to say hi to you." And you were talking to Breeze's parents at the time.
That was just outside the convention center, right?
Yeah.
He does remember. That will be.
So here we are 2 months later. But again, thank you for joining the show. I just want to, for the viewers that don't know you that well, I kind of want to lay like a foundation to like learn more about the man behind the caster. So we'll start right from the beginning. Where did you grow up?
Where I grew up, Germany. Like an hour's drive south from Frankfurt, so in the south of Germany. Yeah, Mannheim, the area. I mean, there's American barracks over there, so some people might actually know it, but that's where I went to school and university.
Nice, man. It's a big, I guess you were saying before the show, you've kind of bounced around all over there. You're a very worldly person. You've lived a lot of places recently. Is it a big difference, like bouncing around when all these different countries, like, or how long does it take to adapt when you get somewhere new, or is it all kind of similar but different?
I mean, for me, it was never really a big issue. Like a couple of people have problems when they're traveling and they get really homesick. For me, that was never a big factor. So after university, after I finished, I went to Australia, lived there for a year, came back to Germany, lived in Berlin for a year and did esports there as well. And then I got the job offer in Korea. Originally, the idea was to only move over there for 3 months and cast StarCraft for GOM TV and then go back. But I ended up staying 3 years. And after that time, there was when Heroes started to come out. So I made the choice to go back to Germany and focused on Heroes for roughly 2 years. And now I'm in the US, obviously. So it's always different depending on where you live, especially, of course, there's huge differences between, let's say, a Western country and a country or like a region like Korea, Asia in general. But overall, once you adapt, I would say, I mean, you get used to anything. There's like bad and good stuff in every country that you go to. There's a lot of stuff that I can bitch about in Germany as well. Korea was amazing, but there was also a couple of downsides in Korea. So no matter where you live, there's always a lot of positives and negatives. I mean, I don't think that's different anymore.
It is what it is. You just adapt, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Since we're outside and we're kind of just getting some history, and this isn't really history related, but Trixler just asked us to ask you, how good was sushi yesterday?
I would definitely give it a 6.5 out of 10.
That works. 6.5 out of 10 is always the right answer.
No, it was really good. We came up with that on the spot. I don't even know what we wanted to go for originally, but then we decided for sushi, and yeah, it was really good. It was good catching up again outside of internet and the chats and just getting some good food. Was awesome. Man. Yeah. Friday. Finally, it's about time.
I can't wait.
Now circling back to Germany, you said you went to school there. Did you go to school for anything specific?
Well, I think the school system is a little bit different. So after school, then I went to university. I studied international business administration, and that had a focus on logistics and marketing. So does have a little bit to do with esports, I want to say, or you can transfer some of the skills maybe.
I mean, like when you're trying to build your brand and
yeah,
right?
But outside of that, like not too much. So while I was studying, I already started casting back at the time, but of course back then it was all in German, and I mean we didn't even have video streams. Nobody had the bandwidth to actually provide a video stream. Twitch didn't exist. Own3D, which was one of the predecessors, didn't exist either. So the only thing that you could actually stream were audio streams, and there were, I think, 2 servers at the time when I started. and those 2 servers were shared by 3 different games. There was always a lot of fighting about who gets the server to cast on. And at the beginning, if you hit 100 people that listen to you, that was already like insane. That was just like, oh my God, there's 100 people listening to me. So yeah, that of course changed a lot. At some point, video streams started to become a little bit more popular. The bandwidth changed, especially when StarCraft 2 hit, for example. But back then with Warcraft 3, it was mostly just audio streams. To an extent, actually, where a third party came in and provided a tool that you could, with a third party tool, observe the game, even though you were not in the game itself. So it was a pretty neat little tool that they called WACTV back then. So as a caster, you had to provide sync intervals where you just like told people what was happening, and you synced on the clock in the game so that they could sync and pause their own game that they're watching right now to you, so that whatever you said synced up with the action in front of the screen. So it was sometimes a little bit frustrating, but it was back then pretty awesome, and the only way that you could actually provide a visual to the audio. And at the same time, it also allowed people to control the camera themselves if they wanted to. So that was an added bonus.
Interesting. So that sounds kind of complicated and a serious process, but
yeah,
you know, you don't really think about it at the time because you are on the cutting edge of something. So
yeah, it was a lot of fun. Like everything, when video streams came in, of course, that made things easier for the viewers. But there was also a lot of people, for example, that said that they don't really like video streams because they can't control the camera anymore. That's of course more the hardcore corner of the audience, but still. So yeah, back then there was a lot of little tools like that.
Now, the other thing I wanted to ask is, and you post pictures all the time on your Twitter, but do you have any hobbies outside of gaming?
Sports, basically. Like right now, especially cycling in the US, but outside of the picture stuff that I post on Twitter, reading is a huge hobby. Like I read a lot, probably way too much, because I usually go through all the books and series way too fast, and then I'm scrambling to find something new that I can read. Movies as well, and of course Netflix binging series. So pretty much the standard, I would say. Like nothing too crazy.
All right. Now moving on to some casting questions. Where does the name Khaldor come from?
I made it up. Khaldor, I made that name up completely. If you Google Khaldor back then, Google would give you 0 answers for that thing. And it's a name that I basically threw together from 5-6 different names that I just liked. For example, there's Eddings had a Belgarian saga, which I really liked. And there was one character that is called Khaldor, a little bit of a different spelling, but I kind of liked starting a character with a name. So there was like Kronos, which was in one of the Highlander series, Khadgar and Korgath in Warcraft 2 back then. So I kind of knew that I wanted to have dark vowels. I wanted to start with a K and put the H in then. So I just literally made the name up at some point. Sounded cool. It was my barbarian in, I think, Diablo 1, 2. Like, I don't even remember. And at that point I said, like, okay, that's going to be it. That fits. I'm going to keep that.
Awesome.
And now it's always poached when I try to get the account in any kind of tool. Try to get it in Snapchat back then, immediately gone. There's even a short story out there in the internet somewhere where the main character is called Khaldor, and I'm almost like, what the hell's happening?
You started something, man. You're
Give me my nickname back.
Well, and that I mentioned earlier, I tried to add you on Skype, and there's a lot of Khaldors out there on Skype.
Yeah, at some point, my first Skype name was actually, the ID was Khaldor, and then with Warcraft already, that was even before StarCraft, before the esports got bigger, I got so many random ads that at some point I just said, like, okay, this doesn't make any sense. I need a different Skype ID that people just can't find by simply Googling for my nickname. So, yeah. So, but I believe that by now there's quite a few. I mean, if you look for, even if you just look up Battle.net accounts, if you look up Battle.net accounts for StarCraft or for Heroes, there is, I think, 15, 20 Khaldors out there.
Bunch of wannabes, man.
It's like, I don't even play on my main account. My main account is just to watch games, and that's about it. So when I just then see people, it's like, oh yeah, I played against you. I'm like, yeah, no, you didn't.
I don't play under that name. You did not play me.
Like, I only play on Smurf. So I'm just like, yeah, no, that wasn't me. And it's like, you get a tweet and some guys are like, oh my God, I just played against your Nova. And I'm like, nope. 3 times no, definitely didn't happen.
Now, I got to ask you, and I meant to ask you before, but I got sidetracked. What you mentioned, you went from StarCraft to Heroes. What was the draw for that?
Basically, at that point, I played a lot of Dota 2, and I really I enjoyed Dota 2, but there's a lot of stuff with MOBAs that I actually really didn't like at the time, and Blizzard basically fixed all the things that I really hated with MOBAs, with Heroes. And I played the game right from alpha. I got a key. I mean, all the Blizzard games usually I at least try out, and I really loved it. I had a lot of fun with it. And so at that point, there was just that chance to just build that whole thing up with the new game. And for me, it was a perfect opportunity because with the move back to Germany, the idea was to focus a little bit more on my own channels, like provide more content on YouTube, do more content on Twitch. And in the StarCraft market, all of that was very much saturated. So in the moment when I moved back from Korea to Germany, I have to focus way more on my own channels to just sustain myself from a financial perspective. Making that happen with StarCraft would have still been possible through Twitch, but not really through YouTube, because all the YouTube channels, all the audience had basically had already their points where they would go. And with Heroes, that seemed like a really good idea to just start from the beginning and build something up there. Was a game that I enjoyed a lot. So for 1 year, basically, I put out content for StarCraft and for Heroes, went to StarCraft 2 events, but also like looked at Heroes and saw, okay, how does the esports scene develop there? And then after a year where I basically did both a little bit, that was during the Heroes alpha time, I made a decision, okay, I'm going to go full-time into Heroes and just like shut the StarCraft part down.
That's awesome, man. It's you know what, a recurring theme with a lot of the guests we have, we ask them what brought them to HOTS, and there's a lot of people who are aiming to be professionals or content creators, and they saw an opportunity there, they fell in love with the game, and it was kind of like in the beginning, you know, when alpha and when the game was in alpha and beta to an extent, it was just it's like the Wild West, right? Like everyone's on an equal playing field, so it's an opportunity to find success. So
I mean, with esports in general, you have to be flexible. For example, for me, Heroes is the third game now that I do basically more or less full time. I started with Warcraft 3 in esports, then StarCraft 2 when Warcraft 3 was just declining, and then the entire just esports scene blew up a little bit with StarCraft. More opportunities arose, and then at some point you just transition out. With Heroes, at some point the same thing is going to happen. I feel like right now the life cycles of games that are in esports are definitely increasing, but at some point you will have to see, okay, do I stay with this? Do I transition into something else? One option would have, for example, been to transition into Overwatch at some point, but I just don't like the game as much as I like Heroes, so there was just no real point to making that switch.
I hear you. I know that feeling.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, Bahgz, your comment about everybody's on even playing field when you start into a new game. And that's true to a certain extent, but if we go into like esports casting, I can't think of anybody that has put in the number of hours that you have, Khaldor, especially straight. Like there was, I can remember one weekend where I fell asleep in my chair watching you, and like 4 hours later I woke up and you were still on, and I'm like, Jesus, how is this possible?
Heroes was actually easy. I had way rougher times in StarCraft. I had StarCraft days where I basically streamed 3 days straight, within those 3 days an accumulative 10-hour break.
Wow.
So like hopping between GOM TV and then heading straight back, casting KSV, which was a Korean online league that was created back then, and jumping from that into a European tournament, from that back into the GOM TV stream.
Right.
And so, I mean, it's fun. Like, I'm not quite sure if I would do the same thing today again for the lols, yes, but not on a regular basis. Korea was tough because of that. The main problem that Korea actually had for me was that at some point it got really draining because of the time zones. From a time zone perspective, the US is by far the best place to live because you can catch Europe in the morning, and then you can still have the evening of the US, and you basically just have more or less a normal day. When you live in Europe, you can catch the Asian time zone in the morning, but that doesn't really help you because the viewership isn't there for the most part. And if you are in Korea, for example, or in Asia in general, then you have a problem because no matter what you want to cast, if it's not the Korean games, you have to basically cast throughout the entire night. So you're ruining your sleep schedule completely. So the last year in Korea, I casted nearly every single night, European or North American events, and it becomes draining at a point. You can do it, and you just have to shift your entire rhythm. But it's not something where I would say, okay, this is something I can imagine myself doing, let's say, for a couple of years straight. You can do that maybe for a year, maybe a little bit longer, but at some point you want to have a bit of a life as well. So, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Sure. All right. So pivoting away from that, I'm going to touch back on the outside of casting questions, but these are brought to you by viewers. So Ganja Goon, fan of the show, asked, and it's a bike question, and I can't speak on this because I have no idea. But the question is specialized or rally, like the city in North Carolina rally bicycles.
Probably specialized.
All right.
Specialized, basically, they're both one of the high-end brands on biking. So it's one of the interesting things when you start cycling in the US, because no matter what I buy, if I buy a laptop, a phone, or a bike, I usually, after I made the purchase, I don't really look into what comes in next and the prices. So when I brought my bike over from Europe, and my bike from Europe was a really old one. It was an 80-year-old bike, and at some point I realized, okay, I'm riding way more now than I did before. It makes sense for me to upgrade. So then I was just looking at the bikes that the people that I rode with were riding. Was like, yeah, that bike looks good, and components. So let's look up what they cost. And people over here have way too much money for some reason. It's like,
I knew where this was going.
I all of a sudden looked some of those bikes up, and they paid between $6,000 and $10,000 for their bike, and I'm just like, that is insane.
Yeah.
Like I'm not gonna pay that. They have electronic shifting on these things and everything. Where I feel like I don't need that. I am completely happy if I still have like a normal shifter. So it was kind of interesting. And Specialized is just one of those brands that is pretty much high end. They have a lot of like mid-tier bikes as well. But if at some point I would really invest a lot of money into a bike, I would probably make sure that I like from the two brands that you named, I would probably go for the Specialized. Like the bike shop where I bring my bike to when I have any kind of issues or when I need new components, they, for example, carry Specialized as one of their main brands. So, yeah.
All right. Okay, so they're brands. I thought they were types of bikes, so that's there's a difference.
Yeah.
Fleshy Bits asks, what's your gym routine like every week, and can we have an arm wrestling mini tournament at BlizzCon next year?
We had enough arm wrestling mini tournaments already. I have 5 of those on my YouTube channel. Like at some point, it's enough. So gym routine right now is basically pretty much on ice because for nearly half a year I had an injury on my forearm, like an inflamed muscle that is slowly getting better. So I can probably get back in a couple of weeks to go back to the gym. But my normal routine was to go between 3 and 4 times a week and then just focus like mostly 45-minute workouts. Most people that go to the gym just like overdo it way too much, and it's really difficult to talk to people about fitness because you have an audience that is very broad. Some people don't go to the gym at all. So you try to explain to them a little bit that it's all about consistency and that you don't need to put in, let's say, 2 hours, for example, that it's actually counterproductive if you put in 2 hours for a strength workout. And then you have people that are a little bit more advanced and immediately jump on the nuances where it's just like, yes, you're right, but what are we talking right now? So normally I think if you want to start working out, if you can make it 2 or 3 times a week to the gym, that's totally fine. 45-minute workouts, as long as you challenge yourself and you rotate through your muscle groups, that's totally cool. The problem that most people have is that they're not consistent enough. And that's the main issue with any kind of exercise. So for me right now, for example, since I can't go to the gym as much as I really would want to until that's completely healed, I just invest more time in biking and do that because that I can easily do. So
there you go. You don't need arms to bike, right? Or do you? Well, I guess you.
Well, I mean, you got to steer, right?
You can lean, man. You can lean, right?
You have to
my
shift.
form might be screwed, but it's not that bad. So yeah, so it's still fine. Like that I can still do. And biking is also, I mean, it's kind of rewarding as well. If you have a lot of climbs, for example, and then first of all, you have an insane view depending on where you can ride, and SoCal has a couple of really good routes. And then also if you go on descents, for example. Just the other day, like I think 2 days ago, I joined a group that I haven't ridden with so far, and they went into a completely different direction here that I usually don't ride to. And I had no idea that we have actually a couple of pretty steep hills here that have like 10 to 15% grade. And on some of the declines there, I went up to 50 miles per hour. So it's absolutely, it's so much fun. And that's definitely going to end up in my routine now that I ride those hills a little bit more often.
That's awesome.
That's awesome, dude. Rewarding experience. I picked up hiking this past summer. Similar. You get to the top, man, and it's nice. Feels good. Trent asks, so if no mini tournament, how about a rematch between you and Jay Shreet?
I'm happy with that once that the arm's healed.
Yes.
Because that is actually one of the things that screwed the arm up. Because the problem was I had it before. Like I had the problem before, and then we were at the after party of Kiev.
Yep.
And people were the entire time telling me, Jay Schritter and we need to do the arm wrestling match. And the problem is that both of us had a few drinks. And so before we ended the party, I was basically very much set on I'm not going to arm wrestle anyone. Because I knew that my arm was already a little bit hurting. I didn't want to make it worse. Then I had a couple of drinks. And then Nurok and Darkmorg wanted to arm wrestle. So I arm wrestled with the two of them. I arm wrestled like 4 people. And at some point, I was just like, okay, right now you can basically just finally lose against Jay Schritter. So let's just get it. Like let's just get rid of that talking point. And yeah. So then we had the arm wrestle going, and I was probably more surprised than anybody else with that one, but it was a lot of fun. But those 2 minutes trying to defeat the Brazilian Beast, that definitely gave my arm the rest. So that didn't really help. That made things a lot worse than they already were. And in hindsight, it was extremely dumb because I promised myself I wouldn't do it for exactly that reason, and now I'm paying the price. So,
you guys,
yeah.
I watched that again. Somebody just released a best of Khaldor video, which was pretty cool to watch the whole thing. But then I went back and watched the entire arm wrestling video, and you guys, like, you were straight up for a long time, and you went back and, like, it was not... This wasn't just a wham and one of you was done. Like, it was...
Have you seen that guy? He's a fucking
huge.
monster.
I know.
Insane.
He sat like 6 seats over from us at HGC, so I got, or at BlizzCon, so I got to really appreciate how big he was, because he was on the show 3 weeks ago, and you can't, like, on Skype is not the same as that dude sitting next to you, and you're just like, Jesus. Huge.
Yeah, Kiev was pretty fun. I mean, that was pretty cool. But of course, he wants a rematch, and I'm happy to give him the rematch where he can crush me. But the problem is, first that needs to heal, because I want my arm back at some point.
Well, yeah, you have to have your arm back, and you guys both have to be healthy. So I'm thinking maybe BlizzCon this year, you guys will both be healthy and ready to go.
BlizzCon sounds good. Like currently, I plan to probably take it easy for another 3 weeks. By then, I hope that the arm is healed enough that I can go back to the gym, and then BlizzCon sounds like a very realistic goal.
Awesome.
Rip for BlizzCon. Hashtag.
And that's going to be the last arm wrestler that I do. I'm done with this shit.
Retire from life after that.
Like, even in China, we were at GCWC, and then we're like at the after party, and the same thing starts again. People come over for arm wrestling, and I'm just like, can't I even get a break for one event? We started this trend at some point, and now it's just like a thing. So yeah, next time he can defeat me at BlizzCon, and then it's his part. It's his turn. Something like that.
There it is.
Right? Once he has the belt, everyone will be coming looking for him.
Hey, for the belt, he needs to defeat me twice, okay? Like, he can only top.
Oh, that's how that works.
Still in the lead.
There you go. There you go.
The belt's going to be a thing. All right. Moving on. I got to ask you, what's your favorite moment as a professional caster so far? Do you have one? And I'm not just going to say just yours, but as a professional caster, all the way back to Warcraft 3.
And we'll give you the same thing we gave Gilly. It can be a top 3 if you want it to be.
It can be or I can't?
It can. Yes, you can pick top 3 if you want.
So top 3. I would say top 3 would be one event where I casted in German World Cyber Games 2008. That was we were a friend of mine and me were the main casters for the event. That was back then when Grubby actually won, and that was pretty amazing. There were a couple of things at the tournament which were absolutely crazy. Biggest audience that I casted in front, a couple of thousand people to that point. And I mean, we're talking 2008 here, so that's 10 years ago, and that was amazing. That was probably one of the first ones. For StarCraft, there were a couple that were really great, but what was pretty outstanding was in Busan, where we casted a tournament for Blizzard, and we casted it at the beach. They built the entire stage on the beach. So that was pretty crazy, that you didn't have a venue and some kind of convention center, but you actually had the beach in front of you, the water to the right immediately. And yeah, that was pretty crazy. It was very different from the normal setup that we had. For Heroes, I'm actually not 100% certain what I would name for heroes. I thought that mid-season brawl was actually pretty cool. The grand final with Tim casting that was pretty fantastic. Like we had a couple of really good finals, I want to say, in Heroes of the Storm. The year before, for example, also in Sweden when I casted the finals with Red, they were insane games. But the cool thing on this year's DreamHack was that the caster booth was basically like in the audience and we could overlook everything. So we actually casted off the main screen for most of the time. And just being in the middle of the audience and feeling like the entire atmosphere and all the hype, especially with a Swedish team in the finals and in Sweden and everybody just going nuts. That was actually pretty cool. And Tim and I were talking before the final about a couple of things that we wanted to try, but we weren't really sure if we could pull it off. So we kind of had a meetup before where we said, okay, we want to do a few things that we already showed throughout the season from casting styles, but we also had a couple of ideas of new stuff that we wanted to do, but we had never really practiced it properly, and we didn't really do it in any kind of live setup, not even in the studio. So we decided probably wouldn't do it, but then it just lined up perfectly throughout the final, and we just pulled it off on the fly, and that alone was just awesome. I mean, you just do that, you look at each other and it's like, yeah, that was sick. And so that on top of everything else was just super fun. So that's definitely one of the events that I'll remember probably for the longest time.
Awesome.
I gotta ask you, who between you and Trixler, who would win in a rap battle? I mean, you guys already kind of went at it in the rap cast battle, but I'm curious.
I'm pretty confident that I would win that. Like I don't know. Like I mean, I'm pretty sure I can win that.
I don't know.
His thoughts.
I think he might be able to throw you off your game because I was rewatching some other clips and there are times where he can like say something and it triggers your reaction. Like
oh yeah, that's cheating. We're talking about rap battle here. We're talking about like interrupting the other guy.
That's true. That's fair.
Also, he has an edge. He's a native speaker. Okay, so when he can beat that battle in German, then we're talking.
Well, that would be impressive, to be fair. Now, Khaldor, you're a guy who's accomplished a lot in your casting career. We mentioned this to Gilly as well, but do you have any more goals that you'd like to achieve as a professional caster?
Just getting better. Like, I don't know. It's like not goals in the sense that I want to cast this one specific event and then that's it, but just to grow with the scene. The thing is, for us, like all the people that basically come in casting and do it now on a professional basis, we don't really know even where everything is headed, because we're the first ones to make it an actual profession, to live of it financially. So we don't know how long you can do it. So at this point, it's just enjoying the journey, trying to improve with it and grow with the scene, and that's basically it. And my goal is usually to just make sure that whatever game I cast and whatever game I commit to, that I can grow the esports environment within that game, or at least help to do that.
I was just going to say that since you guys are on the forefront of that, everything you do is kind of to help grow the snowball, so to speak.
Awesome.
All right. Let's see. What else do we have here? Ooh. Exon asks, these are going to be, these two questions are going to be kind of hots in general. What do you like most from the gameplay update so far?
Which one?
The
most
2018.
recent,
yeah, the 2018 gameplay update. The one with the camps.
Okay, so does that include PBM?
It can.
It can.
But it's been yes, it can. Yes.
Okay, so I want to have that back as fast as possible, because the problems that we had with the placement bug that screwed everything up, that is actually a good solution for it. What I would really like them to do, though, is provide a little bit of information within the client so that people aren't confused by it anymore, because the misunderstandings are actually insane regarding that. I really like the way that they now changed, for example, the damage that forts and towers in general do, because the games were just way too short. So that we have those changes now in the game, I think that was absolutely needed. The game length is now a little bit better, so you still have every now and then a stomp or a really short game, but in general, game length has increased. So I really like that. But for me personally, what I'm looking for normally is not really changes in the game itself, but more so the esports environment. For example, I really want to have PBM back because I feel it's going to be a massive improvement towards the matchmaking system. I want voice chat to finally be in there, and I want them to be a little bit more pushing the competitive side of EuroLeague, which for me, for example, says that for Grandmaster, you introduce new rules. And with new rules, I mean, let's say, for example, you play the season. Right now, you get at the end of the season, so to say, the achievement of, hey, what was the highest rank that you ever reached in EuroLeague in that season, in that time frame? And for Grandmaster, that just shouldn't apply. It should not show you what was the highest you reached. It should show you what did you reach at the end of the season.
Where you finished, right?
Exactly, where you finished, because then you have people that are more motivated to actually continue playing EuroLeague. It feels more like a reward if you finish first or top 10 or something. You could also combo that with a rank point decay. I'm not sure if RDK is really the best solution there. We had a couple of interesting discussions with a few players about that, but rank decay might be the better solution to make all that happen and to make sure that someone doesn't just go in, get 10,000 points and then says, all right, I'm done, and moves away. So get some kind of decay in that would definitely keep them motivated to play. And just in general, try to make sure that the highest level of play in EuroLeague is something that challenges you and that is rewarding and really makes the bridge happen between the casual play or just like the EuroLeague play and the competitive scene, because that's what EuroLeague needs to be. It needs to be the bridge to competitive play if we want that entire esports aspect to grow and to just make sure that the competitive scene is helped.
Cool. All right. I think that was a really well-worded answer. I like that. Thank you. All right. Now back into casting questions, bouncing around a little bit here. What is the research? What for you? What is your research process like to prepare for casting games? Like, is there and do you do anything different when you are traveling for an international event?
It's going to be a little bit different for me this year because of all the stats stuff that I now have been building up. But normally, let's say last year, for example, you're of course way more familiar with your own region. So when you travel to an event, then normally that means that you have to look up a lot more about the other regions that are going to attend the event. So that means that can mean that in some regions you only look at the final games to get a bit of an idea of teams. If there's, for example, only one representative, if you're talking about Korea or North America, then you watch a lot of the VODs of the team that makes it to the tournament. You have to familiarize yourself a little bit more with the meta that was played over there and also the teams themselves. What do they do? Because a team can have a very different meta from what's played in the region, for example, especially when you have a very top-heavy region like Korea was for a long time, where you have 2-3 teams all the way up at the top, and then the rest basically falls off pretty heavily. So then the meta that is played by the teams at the top is not necessarily the same that's played across the region itself. So you have to do mostly research into other regions. And for the weekly process, it's not really so much individual prep work because I kind of watch scrims most of the week. So it's just a routine that you have at that point. So you, of course, look into who plays who at the weekend, and you look a little bit into the situations that the teams have in the league. You look a little bit, okay, well, how did the last few games go? Did the team look solid? Did they have some problems? Did one of the players, sometimes, for example, you just like talk to players and ask, hey, how did practice go when you couldn't watch all the scrims yourself? Sometimes someone was sick, for example. Does he feel better? Shot calling problems, did that get resolved? Stuff like that. But normally within your own region, you're normally so invested in the league itself already. At least I am, and then watching the scrims too, that the preparation process for the individual games then becomes less. If I wouldn't watch all that stuff and do that on during the weekdays, then I probably would have to invest more into the specific games at the weekend time, if that makes sense.
No, it does.
I got you.
Let me ask a kind of a follow-up question. So you cast games and you guys have the early slot and I mean, it's Europe, but you have the early slot for the... You have the middle slot, I guess. Let me put it that way. When you're done casting games, do you watch the NA games? Do you in Trickster go out and have a beer and you relax the rest of the night and get ready for the next day? What's that like? Like, you finish up your second EU set of the day and it's Friday mid-afternoon.
Yeah, so for us, that's usually while we are on the way back because we have to commute quite a bit. So depending on traffic, that can be 1.5 hours easily. Then normally while we are like on the car ride back, we listen or watch, depending on what game is currently on, to the North American broadcast. And then depending on the games, when I get back home, I decide if I want to watch them right now, or if I do something else. For example, I might sometimes just throw in a gym workout right afterwards, or go riding while there's still daylight. And then I don't catch the North American games. It really depends on what's being played. If I have the top 1 team playing against the number 8 in the league, then to be honest, I really don't care, because that result is going to be pretty obvious. And so if I know that the games are either going to be very one-sided, or if they don't really do anything for me, then I'm just going to use my time differently. But if I have the number 1 up against the number 2, then I'm going to just sit on the couch, get something to eat in the meantime, and watch the games completely, and take notes during that. So it's really dependent on what's being played this week.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Makes sense. A fan and a caster.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you still want to, with some teams, when you're just watching different regions, you're a little bit more invested than with others. I mean, right now, this season, especially now that we've, for example, spent quite a bit of time at GCWC, I want to really see what the former Roll20 roster is going to be able to pull off. Tempo Storm is going to be really interesting for North America this season, if they're going to be super successful, or if they are going to get internal problems because there's too many captains in that lineup. I mean, that's going to be an interesting storyline.
Cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah, so that's going to be interesting to see. So when you have those teams play against each other, then of course you're going to watch these matches, especially since there's always the assumption that they are going to be the ones to make it to the international events. So the more I watch on a regular basis there, the less I have to do VOD research once that the tournament is actually starting.
Well, especially like Western Clash, where that's basically who's.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. Yeah. Okay.
All right. So here's a good one, actually. So how difficult is it to build chemistry with a fellow caster? Like, I guess for a good example would be, I don't know if you had ever casted with Trick before you finally were able to get over here for the second part of phase 1. How was that? Like, what's that transition period like?
Casting with Trick at the beginning was really funny. No matter who you cast with, you have to find synergy first. And I would actually say that I never really had any problem doing that after a few casts, because I'm probably, when you look at all games in esports, I'm probably in the top 10 of casters that have casted the most with other people. I mean, I have 16 years of casting experience right now. I casted in Warcraft 3 with dozens of other casters. Same is true for StarCraft as well. So at some point, you really know how to cast with a second person. There's always a couple of, don't get me wrong, like you're not going to jump into a broadcast even with that experience and everything works perfectly. There's going to be a couple of kinks that you have to smooth out. And the more regularly you cast together, you're going to build up that chemistry. Yeah. So you need to, for example, recognize each other's speech patterns. Best example is Wolf. I casted with Wolf for 3 years in Korea in StarCraft 2, and then we didn't cast together for I think 1.5 years when I moved back to Germany and concentrated on Heroes more. But the first event where the two of us casted our first Heroes game together, it just clicked immediately. I mean, I know exactly how he changes his voice when he wants me to take over, and he knows the same about me. So that just, it was easy because you already built that chemistry at some point. So with Trick, the same happened at the start, but Trick back then was still in full Care Bear mode. He's a little bit more edgy these days. And it was just really funny because he took everything literally at that point. I remember that we were getting makeup one day, and I'm not quite sure what exactly happened, but he made some kind of joke or some kind of comment. And I was like, dude, I'm just gonna hit you. And he just, of course, at that point he said, why would you hit me? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Of course I'm not gonna hit you. Like, I'm not being literal here. But he thought I was dead serious, and he actually thought I would hit him. So stuff like that just happened at the beginning. And yeah, obviously over time you then know each other a little bit better, and then those things don't happen anymore. But yeah, it's just, no matter who you cast with, it takes usually a couple of casts until you have the perfect synergy. So
for sure. Makes sense. I got to ask you, did the format for 2070 HGC work well for the casters in terms of I guess the way it was structured for a time commitment for you, getting rest, things functioning behind the scenes the way they should? And if if there were a couple of small tweaks that you want to talk about, are there any, or are you pretty happy with the way they put it all together?
I mean, it depends a bit on what you mean now. For example, when we're talking about the casting routines at events themselves, there's a lot that has actually changed that I really like. So, for example, we have a way, like the casting setup is way more stable right now. The people that you cast with, and also the desk, for example, how our analysis desk is formed. We have a way more stable desk, meaning that most of the time you have at least 2 or 3 people now that will guide you through the entire show. We don't have as many rotations anymore. That's a pretty good thing if you're not a hardcore viewer that watches every single game, because if you only tune in for 1 or 2 games and you always have different people sitting in front of you, you are oftentimes as a viewer in a situation where you don't really know, okay, what exactly is going on. But if you have the same people guiding you or a core number of people guide you through the games, then it's easier for you as a viewer to connect with that. So those changes were made towards the end of 2017, and I really liked that a lot, that we had a little bit more stability in this. In terms of the schedule, I would say our schedule is overall pretty demanding, but then again, I like that because I get pretty much bored when I don't cast. So when the teams weren't scrimming, I was actually pretty pissed because I'm like, this is stupid. I need my heroes fixed.
Right, like what have you done for the last month? Like half of them took. Well, I guess you traveled to Germany for Christmas and stuff too, though. So
yeah, to be honest, a lot of that was still work because I had to go back. We had the HGC summit in.
Yep.
So that was actually the end of the year was actually pretty rough because we had BlizzCon, which is quite a bit. It can be quite tough because it takes a while. Then we had, I think, was it a week or 2 weeks break after that?
2.
And then 2 weeks break, and then immediately China. And the thing is that China was insane. It was a great tournament. It was a lot of fun, and they really took good care of us. But it was 3 weeks in China, and we were basically spending the entire time in the same building as well because they had the venue outside of the final days was in the hotel. So you spend all your time there, except for 2 days where we went to the Great Wall and stuff. But the area where the hotel was located, there wasn't really a lot going on. So 3 weeks there, then a couple of days in Germany, then going straight to France for the summit, spending I think 3 nights there, going back to Germany, where I also had to work some different stuff. There's also the time where the PBM hit, and all of a sudden I felt like I'm not doing nothing else but answering Reddit comments all day long,
right?
And getting tilted about them. And then, so at that point I was traveling for 5 weeks, and that was really rough. I traveled back on Christmas Eve to the US. Okay. And at that point, I was just like, everybody just leave me alone. I want to sleep in my own bed. I want no one to talk to me for a while. So at that point, I just took a rest. I didn't even do anything for New Year's Eve because I was just basically sitting there. I was just saying, like, I can't be bothered. I can't be bothered to find out where there are any parties or anything. I just want to have my peace and quiet for a little bit. Because the hotel can be as nice as you want it to be. And even when I'm in Germany and I'm staying at my dad's place, which is, of course, also nice, it's still not your own bed. There are still other people in the house, in the apartment, in the hotel that have very different rhythms than you do. And you can't just simply do whatever you want. So once I was back here, I was just like, okay, I need a week and have a bit of a breather. But after that week, I was immediately like, sitting there. I was just like, where are the scrims?
Meanwhile, everybody else is off.
Yeah, exactly. And then all of the players are, dude, we're not scrimming for another week. And I was like, what? What am I going to do for an entire week? So yeah, that's when the stat prepare stuff, the sheet started. But yeah, so long story short, schedule is pretty demanding. And I understand that some people are not really too happy with them. I personally like it to be busy. And I can always squeeze in a day or two where I just go either then biking or like a mini vacation or something else. So right now I'm still happy with it. I like being busy.
Awesome.
There you go, man. Good for you. Might not be able to answer this fairly, but I'll ask. Who is your favorite co-caster?
Or casters.
Casters.
Yep. Either way.
Like game? I mean,
totally up to you. It can be Wolf in StarCraft 2, whatever you want. Favorite person you've co-casted with?
I don't think there's a favorite person.
All right.
I had co-caster in German back then for Warcraft 3, which was actually like a lot of fun. Reaper. he always wants me to not tell people his real name because he's a professor now and he teaches, and a lot of his students actually watch esports. And he doesn't necessarily want them to know that side, but yeah, I always had a lot of fun with him. We had really good chemistry, so it was always awesome. For English, I mean, with Tim right now, it's super fun. I enjoy casting with Red. What I have to actually say, what really surprised me, and her as well, Gilly and I have an insane casting chemistry.
Yes!
And the first time that we casted together was in Kiev, and both of us knew that, I mean, we knew it wouldn't be a disaster, but both of us went into the cast and we were like, okay, we have no idea what exactly happens here. So we were both a little bit like, this could be really good, but this could also be really bad. And so we casted together there for the first time. We had an insane amount of fun. We were both very, very unhappy that we didn't cast together at BlizzCon. Then we were paired for GCWC again, and it was the same thing all over. So that was one of the things that I really enjoyed. And her and I, we usually talk a lot about politics and stuff outside of casting. So we're both coffee addicted. That really helps. So usually we kind of, if for example, we have a day at the office at Blizzard, we usually meet up a little bit earlier and just like grab a coffee together and then talk about the newest politics stuff, talk about Trump or like, I don't know, whatever just happened in the last 1-2 weeks in politics in the US.
Right.
And that's always a lot of fun. And I kind of think that translated a little bit in the casting as well. I can really banter with her without ever having to be afraid that she gets offended by anything. And if there's a little bit too rough banter, she just turns around and just like slaps me one or something. It's just fun. It's really
great, man. It's funny you mentioned that because she said the same thing last week on the show.
Well, she did. Yeah. She said almost, well, not identical, but she said the same feeling, right? Because I had told her, watching you two do GCWC when it was Roll20 versus can't remember who it was. Was it Dig or Fnatic?
I mean, it was EU versus NA.
Right,
so
right.
That was one of the biggest things that we could actually banter between regions.
It was amazing. Like, just the banter between you two was like, it brought that cast to a whole nother level, which was like the coolest thing. Because I've always been a fan of you and Dreadnought together used to be like the dream team for me way back when they were still mixing casters up. But then you guys did the GCWC, and I was like, oh my god, this is like, especially with the NA versus EU spin to it. It was, yeah, hands down my favorite cast.
Yeah, that was one of the things actually where I'm always getting a little bit sad, because some people, when they watch a cast and you have banter going on between two regions, they get salty about it. And I think it's the best thing that you can actually have, where you have like ideally on eye level, of course. If one team gets absolutely stomped, then yes, it's a little bit of a different dynamic, and it can be really annoying. But for me personally, the cast that I enjoy the most is a cast where I have banter with someone and nobody takes it serious. For example, I don't know, an A player whips a mosh pit and you can call it an A mosh right there. And then your co-caster immediately turns around when Chromie misses a combo and says like, you look at that, that's Europe. They can't even hit 2 spells in a row. You know, stuff like that. That's fun. And that's actually something that I personally enjoy the most, not only when I cast, but also when I listen to it.
Right.
But then there's always people that you have right afterwards that are just immediately starting to jump in and say like, oh my god, this is so bad. And it's like, yeah, he hates that region so much. And it's like, no, guys, it's just back and forth banter. I mean, it's like, yeah, I don't know. But that's the style that I enjoy the most. So that's one of the reasons. It's actually cool that she said the same, because I watched some of the interview, but that part I missed.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing. She just said she said she was pretty apprehensive for that first cast with you, and then she was very surprised with how quickly you guys clicked.
Yeah.
So, do you have any suggestions for how listeners, viewers could provide feedback to the casters? If there any way to reach out to them? I guess. The way this question's worded is how to give Blizzard feedback, but I don't think Blizzard has an avenue at all. So how do they get what's the best way for them to get a hold of the casters and provide feedback, do you think? If you had a suggestion.
That's a little bit tricky. I can go into that because we get actually a lot of feedback. The problem is that most of the people that give us feedback are very, I mean, it's like, You guys are an idiot. You have no idea what you're talking about. You are so bad, blah, blah, blah. Or it's just the opposite, like you're so good, but there's never specifics.
Right.
So if you actually give feedback, then it would be the best thing to actually give specifics where you said, okay, this is something that I really like, or this is something that I really dislike, and then the reason. When it happens in any kind of public space, like let's say, for example, a Reddit comment or a Reddit thread, a lot of people just simply don't understand that just because they give you some feedback doesn't mean that you have to accept that feedback.
Right.
For example, when I read, when there's always like threads where people talk about casters. Every single time I read something in those threads, I usually think about, okay, is that something that I can see why the person thinks that. Sometimes you're just reading comments of an idiot that hates your guts, and that guy is going to bitch on you all day long, no matter what you do. So you can't change that. If someone starts complaining about your voice, I mean, I'm sorry, but like, what do you want me to do? So I can't really change that either. But if there's a comment where I feel, okay, maybe that guy has a point, then what I normally do is I go to someone that I know, that I respect, another caster, for example, and say like, listen, I've read this piece of feedback. It's something where I'm not quite sure if that's justified or not. Could you do me a favor and could you maybe listen to it? So, and then you get the feedback from a person that is like in the scene as well. Because sometimes people home in on something that they did in one moment, in one cast, you never did it again, but it's the one thing that stuck out for a person.
Right.
And then they just have that in their mind. I had a really interesting conversation with someone on Reddit, for example, where a person in, I think it was a caster announcement thread for an event, where he said that he feels I'm heavily biased against North America. And I wrote him back and I said, listen, I actually think that there's a bit of confirmation bias going on for you, because I don't really think that I do that. Yes, sometimes when we have a banter cast, we pull jokes about each other's region, but it's always a friendly banter. And I don't think that outside of that, it's actually true. So could you please do me a favor and check maybe for a couple of weeks, listen to the casts, and then let me know if you still feel that that's actually true. And it was actually really nice because he wrote me back, I think 2 months later, and said that he listened to the casts and that he actually agreed with me in that sense. But if he would have written me back and would have said, listen, I listened to all of that and I still believe it's true and here are reasons why, then I would have just like forwarded to someone within the casting community and said like, okay, this is the feedback that I got. He seems to be like a rational person that is making a point.
Right.
Instead of just trying to bitch at me, can you maybe have a bit of a look in the coming cast and let me know if that's true? And some things are also like stylistic points where you don't want to change. I mean, I get yelled at by people that tell me I only scream in broadcasts and do no analysis, and I have people that told me I need to hype more because I only analyze. So what do you do with that feedback? It's
right.
exactly opposites. So there's a golden middle everywhere. I feel it's also one of the things that a lot of people don't really understand, because there are. It's tough to explain. If you look at casting, for example, and we had threads on Reddit where people said like, listen, this is how League of Legends is casted, and they link the VOD of a grand final in League of Legends in front of an audience, a live audience. There's like action going on and everything, and the casters go absolutely crazy. And then they bring the comparison, and this is Heroes of the Storm casting, and they bring in an example video of the regular season at the middle of the season, where the top team plays against the lowest team in the league when there is no audience and no nothing. So it's like, of course, if you compare those two, what do you expect? If you want to compare things, you have to use games that are roughly on the same level. So if you want to have a comparison between one game and a grand final, you need to pick a grand final from the next game as well. And you cast a grand final differently than you cast a league game. When I'm at BlizzCon, for example, and I have 5,000 people sitting behind me and just losing their mind about every single kill, of course that's going to be a way more hyped cast. You are feeding off the energy of the audience, and you're translating that into your broadcast. If you're sitting in the studio and you have a normal league game where a single kill doesn't mean as much, and where the team isn't eliminated if they lose that particular map, then you cast that very differently, especially if you cast every single day of that weekend. So you have to adjust a little bit. You can't just simply treat every single game as if it's a grand final. And there are a lot of people out there that understand that perfectly and of course say, okay, I get that. But there's also other people that don't really get that there's a difference between the two. And that also you need to adjust, like casting an event, not only from that perspective with the audience and how you cast the games, but also for you as a caster, how you talk about the game. Casting an event is very, very different from casting 6 weeks straight every single weekend for 6 hours, because you have to really adjust what you talk about. You can't just. We are already in some sense oftentimes repetitive because we have to, but that's exactly one of the problems as well. We have people that watch every single game. Of course, I can explain again why ETC made it back into the meta and can now either play the offlaner with Stage Dive or can play the main tank with Mosh Pit. And for a lot of people that tune into maybe 1 game a weekend or 2 games a weekend, that's news. They hear it and they say like, hey, this is actually cool information. But there's others that watch every single game we cast. So when we do it again after 4 weeks, because people still ask the question on social media, there are some people in there like, oh my God, these guys talk again about the same thing. Lul ETC 2017. So it's just like, it's really difficult to hit that middle ground because we have to cater to very, very different audiences all the time.
Right. I just tune it out when it's the 3rd time I've heard it said, but that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine too. And I can completely understand that. It's just, for us, it's really tricky. There's some people that want to have a heavy analytic cast where the only thing that the casters talk about is about the speed of a rotation, certain talent choices. And then there's others that say, why do you talk about talents? I can see the talents at the top. Why do you talk about those? It's just like...
You're never going to make everyone happy.
Exactly.
So the best thing you do is find a balance, right?
There has to be a balance that you try to hit, and that balance will never be perfect. But between the two casters that cast something, you always have to try and find the best compromise that you can get, and also make it adequate to the situation that you're in. I mean, one of the toughest games to cast is if you have a game where you know from the get-go that one team is going to be stomped. That's one of the hardest things to cast, and everybody expects different cast there. So it's really tricky to find that balance, and that's what people sometimes miss, and especially when they then make a comparison to a grand final where the teams are on eye level and compare that comparison just doesn't fly. So there's a lot of aspects to casting, I would say, that the audience isn't aware of when they criticize it. Coming back to your feedback point, the best way to provide feedback between those things is try to really think those things through, think about the situation, and also then try to explain why do you give that feedback. If you didn't like a cast, it's completely fine, but try to explain why. And don't be upset if the person that you give the feedback to maybe says, okay, I get why you don't like it, but I'm still going to continue doing it because I have my reasons and they are X, Y, and Z.
Right. Yeah, I think that's fair. Well, that was really well thought out. So I hope everyone who has some feedback is listening.
Right? I think the second part to that question is, how do we make sure Blizzard knows that everybody appreciates the casters they have so that they try to keep those casters around? Right? Like, let's say everybody loves Jhow and they want to keep Jhow in 2019. Like,
I mean, Blizzard is usually pretty good with the feedback there, but you can always reach out. I think they have several email links that are provided on the HGC websites. That's, for example, an avenue. Reddit is monitored, probably not like to the complete extent of everything, so I don't think that's necessarily the best outlet for it. Tweets as well. I think for esports, trying to find an avenue through the website is probably the best way to do it.
Cool.
All right, now back on track here. Whose name is the hardest to enunciate in the middle of team fights? Off the top of your head.
I don't know. I actually think I got pretty good with that. We had a lot of rough names in StarCraft, and I think ever since then, I don't really think there's one where I have a big problem anymore. The Polish guys at the beginning of Heroes of the Storm, that was a bit of a struggle. Like Shishu and Zhuf, for example, until I had that down, that took a while, especially because nobody could actually agree what exactly the pronunciation is until I asked them directly, and they could help me with that. I think it's harder for Tim. Like for English native speakers, it's a lot harder because the toughest player names to pronounce for them are probably European names, and some of the European names are just a bit rough. For example, Poik. Poik is a name that every single American caster that I commentated with, they always get it wrong. They always call him Poyok. I don't know where the second O comes from, why they try to call him a chicken. I have no idea. But he at some point just shrugged it off and was just like, I don't care anymore. I tried, but like, yeah. So by now we have a few that can finally do it, but I can't even remember how often Tim called Poik Poyok. And that's one of those things that's just harder for a native English speaker than for someone that comes from Europe in the first place, because you're a little bit more used to those sounds and it makes more sense to you.
For sure. That's interesting. Juf always threw me off when you were saying his name, because I'm looking at it on the screen. I'm like, wait, okay, I guess I can see that.
Yeah.
What's the focus when casting team fights? Like, is there a particular aspect of the team fight that you focus on, or is it just, or is it all about just saying everything as fast as you can?
It depends very much on the team fight. I mean, when we have a team fight, for example, when I realize, okay, this is a Rap God team fight, then you just go all out. And then I just like go bam, full in, and you try and make sure that you hit everything as much as you can. If it's depending on the team compositions, if there's, for example, like a key duel between elements of both teams, where, I don't know, in a double support composition, for example, when you have Vala double support in the old meta, Vala was, of course, a focus. So if Vala dies, the fight's over. So a lot of your focus is on the one element on the team that has to die in order to make it a win for the other team. So those are your focus points. But outside of that, you're just trying to keep up with everything that's happening and then go with the flow. So you have to be pretty flexible with that. But again, some team combinations make it easier, some don't, but I don't think you have ever one single focus. It's mostly thinking about, okay, who's on both sides? Do we have any specific ults, for example, that we need to pay attention to? Another example would be you have a combo where on one side you have Lucio, on the other side you have Genji. So when we were casting those team fights, you needed to watch Lucio because you needed to find out, okay, is Lucio forced to drop his sound barrier before Genji goes in with the Dragon Blade? And if that happens, then you already know how the team fight is going to go. Or do we have a certain stun lock combo on one side? Then, of course, you pay more attention to cleanse, because that's going to be one of the linchpins of the team fights itself. So you always try to figure out what's going to be the key element of the team fight, and then you can focus on that. If that doesn't exist, or if it's like a balance, or the team fight just like plays out a little bit differently, then you just try to be flexible enough that you can react to whatever's happening on the screen.
Man, that's awesome. What kind of stuff goes on in the background while you're casting or analyzing? Is there a producer always like whispering like orders in the background, or is it pretty quiet?
It depends. Sometimes, yes. I mean, we had a lot of casts. Sometimes when you see a caster being very confused and all of a sudden unable to finish his sentence, there's a very good chance that at that moment the producer thought it was a very good idea to just tell him a specific thing in the middle of your sentence, and you're just like, blah, blah, blah. So that can happen. Usually we're trying to make sure that nothing really is shown towards the audience. I mean, we had literally broadcasts, not necessarily in the HGC studio, but at offline events where, for example, the microphone of one caster just died, just in the middle of the cast. And then you just signal the other guy, keep going, make sure that you keep talking. The other guy rips his headphone off, starts running, and finds someone from the tech crew and tells them, listen, my headset is down. And in the meantime, one person is filling everything. And then later on, you go to Reddit and it's like, he never lets his co-caster talk. So you just kind of save the broadcast, and then you get bitched on later because you don't let your co-caster talk, and it just feels bad. But yeah, stuff like that always happens. There's tech problems that sometimes keep going on. Sometimes there's a producer that talks to you. In an ideal world, the producer always talks to the person that's currently not talking, or to the host, and gives them just a couple of instructions. But there's always stuff going on. It depends, of course, again, where you are. HGC rundown at the studio is pretty much, you know what's happening. Everybody knows the routine unless there's something that's a little bit special on that particular weekend. But on an offline event, there is a whole lot of stuff that can go wrong. And then it's really up to the casters to be flexible enough to just play over that. I mean, we all know what happens when, for example, a player pauses the game, or if there is a disconnect somewhere, that you have to fill time. So you have to be able to just talk about a few topics and have a couple of talking points ready where you can just have a conversation to bridge as much time as you possibly can. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that can definitely go wrong in the middle of the broadcast, and then you just have to wing it.
Improvise. I know that life. Last week, for example, the internet died. Which team's the most unpredictable team to cast in draft if you had to pick one?
Oh, definitely Expert, like ADRD's team in general. Because he moved way more towards the meta, because I think he talked about this at some point where he said that he feels they didn't really change their style too much, but a lot more things that they did are now more accepted as meta picks. And so both happened at the same time. Like they moved a little bit more towards the middle, and the meta moved a little bit more towards what they were doing. But they were always the team that could throw you the biggest curveball. Or, of course, Chinese teams. I mean, with those, you never really know what's happening.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's going to follow ADRD to Zealots, or do you think we lost some of that because that group of 5 is not together?
I think to an extent it's definitely going to follow him there, but I think they're also way past the times where we had Thrall, Gazlo, and Tomb, for example. So I feel they are still good enough for an occasional odd pick out there, but that style where they really try to just win through the draft has changed a little bit. I feel where we could see a few of those niche picks is mostly the new teams that come into any region, because they are the ones that maybe just accept that they are on the mechanical level not quite as good yet as established teams that have been practicing regularly for months or years. So they might just try to throw in a pick that the other team can't deal with in that situation, or be a bit more willing to experiment.
Cool.
Okay. We've got some viewer questions. Dugal asked, well, not viewer questions, but Reddit questions. Dugal asked, you're the only caster who mentions watching scrims, at least in a frequent way. What's the best part / benefit to you as a caster of doing that? What do you get from casting scrims?
Watching.
Sorry.
Yeah.
We don't want Reddit to blow up again.
Where can I watch that scrimcast? No, so basically, there's a couple of elements to it. So with some teams, I can, for example, jump into their voice comms as well while they're playing. Some don't like it. Some are absolutely fine with it. Watching scrims in Europe has never really been a problem with me and the teams. So if you're in voice comms, that's super interesting, because you get a bit of an idea of what the thought process is what the thought process is when they make their decisions, how communication works, who is the one who makes the final call, things like that. Since from the outside, it always seems like pretty clear to people, or they feel they have a very good grasp on how exactly a team communicates, but that's rarely accurate. So oftentimes there's like a lot of discussions going on, or a lot of just sharing of information within the team communication that's super interesting to understand a little bit better how they play. Especially since sometimes you have decisions where you're looking at it without having the voice comms and you're like, what just happened there? And then you listen to voice comms and you understand, okay, maybe there was just a misunderstanding. Maybe someone or maybe they were apprehensive about something, or they said, okay, we need to give this one up and take the next fight, stuff like that. And it just really helps you to understand the mindset of the teams a little bit more. If you can't listen to the comms, then it still helps you a lot to understand where the teams are going when it comes to meta. So you can, for example, like you get, of course, a lot of like raw data out of it, but you can also see when a team, for example, experiments with a new build on a certain hero, or when they bring a new hero in with a new combination, just stuff like that. It just really helps you to get a bit of an idea how the meta works, how the players do their thing, and yeah, just overall, it just gets you very familiar with a competitive mindset, since it's one of those things where competitive is very, very different from Hero League. So the best thing that you can do to prepare for casts is to watch competitive games. And that's the best way to do that, is watching scrims.
Okay. Exon asks, I think I'm saying his name right, Exon. He asks, yeah, you seem to be in scrims all the times. How often do casters interact with players? And to follow up with that, Is this required by Blizzard, or is this something you do on your own? Are you obliged to watch X hours of streams per week, or can players deny access for some scrim sessions?
So Blizzard doesn't require us to do anything. They require us do your research however you feel fit for it. So we need to be prepared for our cast at the weekend, but we can schedule and structure our research the way that we want to. And that
be good at your job. We don't care how you get there.
Exactly. So there's definitely a trust relationship where they said you are here for a reason, and just do your thing. Whatever your process looks like, do that process. So they don't force a process on us. The players can deny us access to scrims. So there is no obligation on their side to let us into those games. I don't know if that would be a discussion for the future at any point, but right now it was never really an issue, so there's no point to it. To my knowledge, I'm the only caster that watches this match scrims of the players. I know that a few other casters occasionally jump in, but I basically watch 3 to 5 hours every day. And I don't know, it's just something they build over time. Like, I've been doing this for 3 years now, and especially when the entire scene grew. I mean, I know most of the players for a long, long time, and would consider myself good friends with them, help them whenever I could. One of the reasons why Dignitas picked, for example, the lineup up back then is I introduced Bakery and Snitch to OD of Dignitas at the launch event back then. Which definitely played a bit of a part in there as well, but like other examples too. So I don't know, when a player has problems with his personal stream, for example, I jump on TeamViewer and set everything up for them so they can stream, stuff like that. Just builds a trust relationship over time. Of course, with some people you are closer than with others, but yeah, it's just my personal process. Watching the scrims, and it also, at the same time, when you watch, you talk to players. You talk to them during the games. You ask questions. Why did you pick that talent? Was it a misclick? Was that something where you just were experimenting, where you wanted to see if it works? Or is it some new avenue that you want to go down? Why did you guys choose to make that particular call? So then you get closer to the players on a personal level, but you also learn to understand how are they thinking and what were they trying to do with a specific comp, for example. Sometimes you have team compositions that are being picked and they get completely demolished, and you're looking at it as like, well, that didn't work out. And then you just ask later on, what was the thought process behind it? I mean, obviously it didn't work, but what was the idea? And so it just helps to have a close relationship to the players in general. And I would say in Europe, we kind of have that. I wanted to make sure with Heroes that the relationship between players and casters is a bit better than it was it's not anymore there, but there were parts in StarCraft 2 where it always felt like it was a bit of a players against casters, and I wanted to make sure that that doesn't happen in Heroes. So one of the goals back then going into Heroes is always to stay close to the players and to the teams and make sure that there's a certain relationship and also like trust between the two, and that you can help each other out, because in the end, both are trying to accomplish the same thing, or you have the same goals there for the scene.
Grow the scene so, you can all reap the rewards of that, right? Let's see. Next question we have here is, what's the most important technical thing to take into casting that you've found to help improve your personal casting, or something that you'd suggest for amateur casters?
What do you mean with technical?
Like, I think this specific person that added this was thinking like good microphone or a good camera or just a good PC in general, or like
like a surprising amount of casts or of streams that I see, they don't seem to really have an idea of how to set up their stream quality. They don't. It sounds like a silly thing, and for a lot of teams, for a lot of people that do casting or streaming, it probably is. But that's the first thing that I check whenever. Like, I watch a ton of streams, and I watch a ton of small streams just because I, for example, always check out new casters, new talents. I want to listen to them and see if there's maybe someone that has a potential to at some point make the leap into, I don't know, an offline event, or even if it's just like open division cast or something else. When sometimes Blizzard talks to us and wants our feedback, so I usually try and keep up to date with that. And for them, and as well for a lot of players, it's just true that they oftentimes have very bad stream settings. So when it comes to the technical stuff, I would say getting a hang of that. And that mainly just means check out how much upload you have available and then adjust that upload in Twitch to your stream quality. streaming a 1080 stream with 60 FPS when you have a 2000 upload, I mean, that's a disaster no matter what you do. So that can't work. It's much better than to lower your quality down to 720 and just have a really good looking 720 stream instead of constant frame drops or constant like problems on the stream itself. So just getting some research into that is probably the first thing I would say is important. Second thing is work on the observing. Like observing is something that casters that do online streams have to do, and it's incredibly important. So there's a couple of small things to pay attention to there. For example, make sure that no matter how you scroll, it's smooth. Don't scroll by moving the mouse to the edges of the screen, for example, or by using the keyboard. Usually drag scroll is the best that you can do. And also when you show talents or any kind of other information on the screen, don't flash, because it's probably the biggest mistake. And there's even some higher level productions that make that mistake. When you decide that you want to show something on the screen to your audience, let's say, for example, you want to show talents or something, you know what you're going to click and you know that it's going to appear on the screen and you're already looking at the area where it's going to appear. But for your viewers, they have no idea. So for them, all of a sudden, something appears on the screen and they're like, okay, what's that? And they try to look. And at that moment, you already turn it off, because you gathered the information because you knew it would be there. So you had a bit of a 1-2 second advantage, whereas your viewers are more confused than anything else. It sounds like a ridiculously small thing, but it's really, really annoying when you see a caster do it all the time.
That totally makes sense. No, it absolutely makes sense, because it's just like click, click. Okay, they took that talent and the screen's gone before you've even looked at it.
Exactly. And some people, when they see that, they want to see a little bit more. So no matter what you show on the screen, make sure that you show it for a few seconds, and rather have it there a second too long than not long enough, just so that people can look at those information, that information for themselves. Stuff like that. That's probably what I say. Technical equipment, I think there's a lot of really good normal headsets that don't cost too much that you can get. There's people that I prefer headsets, others prefer standing mics. That's a personal preference, I would say. So, yeah. Now, I don't really think there's anything too big there.
I just, as someone that used to watch you cast all the time, I seem to recall you had a separate headset and mic back then. It was like a little, was that just your personal preference because you'd used all that up to that point, or was there a reason behind that?
I wanted to increase the quality of the audio, and that was in Europe. The headset broke when I brought it over from, or not the headset, the microphone broke when I brought it over from Germany to the US. And then I was looking into buying myself a way more expensive headset. And in the end, I just thought about it. I was just like, why would I? It's not really worth it. I'm not doing like a full production here anymore. So I got this one right now, which is fitting the purpose quite well. So I could upgrade it, but I didn't really have to. So this is, again, like, do you need a better mic? Yes or no? What do you use it for? If you, for example, already have like a studio and you want to go for full studio, then of course you wouldn't run with a gaming headset, no matter how good the microphone is. But that's a judgment call then in the end, that also is determined by how much money can you invest and what is it for. Right. For me, casting a couple of amateur games from at home, besides my HGC gig, because I want to grow the grassroots and want to grow the scene, does not need me to have a $500-600 headset there. The audio quality doesn't improve to an extent where a viewer would say, okay, this is a benefit that really works out for me. So if I, for example, would say, okay, HGC is over, I'm going to move back to Germany, and all I do is do my own personal stream, then I would probably invest into a little bit more expensive equipment.
Okay.
We haven't gotten to the Lucio question yet. We're
getting there, man. We're getting there.
We're getting there. This list is way more extensive than I thought it was.
Okay.
Sorry. All right. Now that you're in the U.S., Khaldor, is it harder to communicate with the EU players being further away? This is a question that Pepe?
Yeah, let's go with a Pepe.
A Pepe? All right.
Not really, because I am an early bird anyways. So usually I wake up at 6:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
Which I guess is, for most people, not really too early that have like a normal job, but for esports, that's actually insane. At least to most of the people that I talk to. So yeah, I watched the first scrim session that European teams have is in the middle of the night for the US, but the second one starts at 7 a.m. So I usually wake up at 6:30 in the morning and then start watching the scrims from 7 to 10. Then there's an hour break, and then most teams have a third scrim session later on, starting at 11 a.m. in the US, and that goes on until 2 p.m. So normally that means that I'm there for that time frame where I can also then talk to teams. Also, after that, a lot of the players stream, so then I jump into the personal streams or watch a stream and look who's if one of the guys that I know is maybe watching the same stream, and you can chat there. So I don't really think that the communication with the European players has in any way suffered. If I would live in a different time zone or in Asia, it would probably be more of a problem. But as I said before, North America is literally the best time zone for esports because you catch NA and you catch EU at pretty good times and then can talk to people. So yeah, I don't think that the relationship suffered in any way. With most of them, I communicate either direct messaging, I mean WhatsApp or anything with numbers, or the Battle.net client, the new app that they have for phones. We talk there, or we just like talk in game. So yeah, it's pretty easy usually. It didn't really run into any problems because of the time zone yet.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to toss this over to LiQuiud, and we are going to dive into HGC questions, and we're going to try and rip through them so we can get to our EU preview.
All right, so this is the Lucio question. So Doe151 asked this question, and it was easily the most upvoted question in the Reddit thread asking for questions, and that's, what's Lucio's current win rate in EU scrims? He needs an update.
Okay, so just to put that into perspective, there was a little bit of a drama so how this happened is actually pretty easy because it was the most overblown thing ever. Literally no one except Reddit had an actual problem. So I worked at that point, I think, for already for weeks on my Excel files. And by now, I think I have 5 or 6 Excel files with 10 to 12 tabs each that cross-reference each other to get statistics and data about like all kinds of stuff. And at that point, I was finally at a moment where everything started to line up and everything worked out a little bit, and I was like super proud. So what I wanted to do is just show people a bit as a preview, hey, once the season starts, this is stuff that I can actually provide you with right now. So I have that all tied down to the actual numbers. So I looked for the most obvious data point that I could find and just tweeted about that. Because I was just insanely proud of how that everything worked.
Right.
The one thing that I didn't consider was that, I mean, I knew that I just wanted to give that as a preview and that I didn't actually want to continue tweeting about scrims. Players didn't. So that was pretty dumb from my end that I didn't really think that through. Could, of course, always argue that they should have known, but like that's also a bit silly. So some of the players were like, huh? A lot of them were immediately saying like, dude, like that, like no player that I talked to had any problem with that data point. Lucio is good, newsflash. So no one really had an issue with that. But of course, for them or for some, it looked a little bit as if I would now all of a sudden start tweeting about data out of those scrims. Now I have this information.
Right.
I was pretty confused by the reaction. I was just like, huh? Then I talked to them and I was just like, okay, I get it. Yeah, dumb from my end. Sorry, apologies. I talked to the teams. Everybody was fine. Continued watching scrims the entire day, watched scrims the next 2 days. Nobody had a problem. And then Reddit blew up, and all of a sudden it was just like big drama. And the biggest drama was that half the people that commented on the thread didn't understand what scrims are. They don't know that it's internal training games. So they assumed, or some people assumed apparently, that I gathered public data that was publicly available, tweeted about publicly available data, and teams tried to shut me down. And so they all of a sudden started to yell at players, which was also not obviously not true. So there was a lot of misunderstandings there. And in the end, no one really had an issue except for Reddit and I think a couple of NA drama queens. Outside of that, it was a bit of a misunderstanding that was resolved in 2-3 conversations, and then everybody was fine. So yeah. Hindsight being 2020, I should have made it a little bit more. I should have either not tweeted it or told a few people first, or just said, okay, this is just an example because I'm pretty proud of it. It's the most obvious one. Obviously, I'm going to only use those sheets for the official match data from the official matches. But yeah, I talked to players about it, and it was really a non-issue. So it was a bit silly.
I must have missed the part where people were confused about what a scrim was, because I don't remember those comments. I'm sure they were there, but I don't remember those comments.
Go in that Reddit thread. There were people that were furious at players, that were insanely mad at players. How dare they tell him to not talk about public data? And everyone was just like, what?
Wow.
It's like that's not what this is about. So yeah, there were a lot of misunderstandings in that. And again, in the end, it was more or less a non-issue. So it was interesting.
So John Knight 111 also asks, do you think after all the changes we've seen over the last 3 months since BlizzCon, we will not see as much double support play?
Definitely.
Awesome. I think everybody was sick of double support.
I mean, still have double support, don't get me wrong, but it's not nearly as oppressive as it was before.
Okay.
So all the drama back then.
Yep.
The support apocalypse. Blizzard is ruining supports. I'm not playing support for you, or what was the thread? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think that was it. I'm not playing support for you.
Yeah, so that was, I think, pretty unfounded. Supports are still fine, but you don't have to play double support anymore to win, even though it's still a viable option. So yeah.
Awesome.
Maybe we could take a bit of a lesson from that. Don't just immediately go all out. And yeah.
What? No, it's Reddit. We have to go all out. How do you feel about the Crucible and then demotion? More specifically, the demotion out of Crucible if you lose.
I'm not sure I follow.
So, there's a number of people that feel like, at least that have talked in Reddit and other places, so grain of salt and all that. If you go into the Crucible and you play the game and you get demoted, like, they don't want to see people lose their paying job, basically. You got demoted out of HGC because you lost to a incoming amateur team. Leftovers beating Team Good Guys, for example. Right, now Good Guys is out. Leftovers is in, which props to Leftovers. They won that straight up. But, you know, do you support the Crucible in that system of bringing in new amateur teams, or do you think, like other people, that maybe that shouldn't exist? I don't know. I fully support the Crucible, so I'm confused by this question personally. But
dumb question. What else would you want to do?
Right? That's what I don't get. Like, how would do you want to grow the scene at some point? Like, how do you...
I mean, it's pretty... what they want is they and I don't think that the resources are there right now, is they want a franchise style similar to what Overwatch League just implemented and the new LCS and LOL and League just implemented. But I don't think the resources are there to do that.
I think comparisons between Overwatch, League, Heroes, and all this stuff are one of the dumbest things that I have to listen to, because people just compare things that, yes, it's esports, yes, it's games, but if you just look at the budget perspective, for example, that just doesn't fly. There's a lot of discussions that basically come always down to the same points. For example, when Mopsio had his fallout and he was punished by Blizzard and wasn't allowed to play, I thought that decision was absolutely horrible. And I think no matter what a player does, if you want to punish him, you should make sure that you punish him and not the team. So preventing someone from playing does not only punish the person, but more so it punishes the team itself. Whereas I think going down a financial route, like you have, for example, in soccer or in football, the same. If someone misbehaves and goes against the way that he is supposed to behave, he gets either fined by the team or he gets fined by the league, because he gets paid by the team if he has a team, so he represents the team, and the team can then make the choice, okay, we fine that person because he doesn't behave the way we want him to behave, or the league can do the same thing. So you have a monetary aspect for that. If we had a situation in which we had enough budget that every team that plays has a dedicated sub player. Like the team roster is, for example, bigger than 5. If we had that budget, then I would absolutely be behind the decision to say that player can also be banned for a couple of games, because then the teams have a dedicated sub. But we don't have that. If you look at traditional sports, you look at American football, you look at soccer, it doesn't really matter. You have several people sitting on the bench that can always jump in, and they are hired. But we don't have the resources in our own game that we can do that. So that's one of the things about how I would always look at it when we have those decisions. So that's why I don't like the comparisons to other esports games that have way bigger budgets than we have, because you just can't compare them. Coming back to the question about the Crucible, I think it's absolutely fair. If we would not have something like the Crucible, then you could just like coast as a team and never really put any real effort into it. So you need to make sure that you're good enough to stay in that league. If you dedicate to, it's easier to make a living out of esports than it ever was before.
Right.
When I decided after I finished university to do esports, I basically gave up a job at a big and pretty lucrative software company and said, I'm absolutely willing to work 70 hours a week to get $400 a week and live below poverty limit. So I said, I'm going to do that for a year. Right now, that would be insane. Right. So you have already way more money in esports than you ever had before, and the trend is increasing instead of decreasing. So obviously, there's certain risks that are still involved. It's not as stable as a normal job, but we also shouldn't forget that we are still at the beginning of esports, and it's growing every single year. So if you want to make it as a professional player, that is a decision that you make early on, that there is a risk involved as well. For some people, it's a big risk. For others, it isn't. It could be that you're still living at home, that you can, for example, like in Sweden, take a gap year at school and just like play for a year and see where this is going. Some people give up a job for that and then dedicate to it. But at some point, you have to also make sure that people that push in from the outside have a chance of actually making a career out of it too. And if you're just not good enough, then I don't see a reason why you should be able to stay on that level, because you can flip the argument around. If we eliminate the Crucible and we make sure that people that play in, let's say, low achieving teams don't lose their job, what about all the other people, all the amateurs that want to make it a job and are willing to work hard for it and take risks, give something up to push into it? All of a sudden you're robbing them of that chance. So
I agree. I mean, I 100%. I mean, we're not here for my opinion right now. We're interviewing you, but my thing is it's going to constantly improve the talent in the league. It's going to give new players an opportunity to cycle into the league. It's going to cycle players out that maybe it's harsh, but don't belong there anymore. It's going to constantly improve the talent and the quality of play that we get to see in the league. That's the biggest thing. And the other thing we get out of it is it's an event. It's not necessarily the Super Bowl, but it's an event. It's a highly watched event. It tracks a higher viewership number than the actual playoffs did pre-midseason brawl and BlizzCon.
Yeah, and also another thing that you have to remember here is a team that has played in HGC had at least half a year where they get very, very regular scrims whenever they want. So if they can't beat an amateur team that pushes through, then there's an obvious gap, because amateur teams usually, like teams that play in the open division, they invest a lot of time, but they normally don't get the same scrim time as an HGC team, and also not the same level of scrim partners necessarily. There's some open division teams that can play against certain HGC teams, but a lot of the top HGC teams, for example, won't play an open division team, so only do it very rarely because it just doesn't constitute great practice for them. So if you, with all that training, don't make it to a point where you can defeat an amateur team that comes in, then they deserve to make it into the league.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Moving on from there. Do you think we should have a third ban?
I'm a little bit torn on it. I wouldn't object to third ban. Like a third ban is one of those. This is one of the decisions where I think it can be pretty healthy, but that's a decision where I would say at some point just let the players vote. Okay. At this point, obviously, we're not going to have it for the first part. I'm not sure if that's something that we could throw in for the second part of HGC. after the mid-season brawl, but I think that has to be a player decision at some point where the players are just basically being asked, do you guys want a third ban? And then there can be a discussion, where would that third ban be?
Right.
And the players should have a say in that. Of course, the final decision then is with Blizzard, but yeah.
Okay.
I think that's something where we again have a bit of a difference between the community that plays Hero League and the competitive scene of it, because we definitely have more than enough heroes that you could run a third ban. Not quite sure if we're in a situation where you necessarily have to. There's like heard arguments for both, but overall I would say that with more heroes coming in, eventually of course we're going to end up with a third ban. So yeah.
Right. Who's your favorite niche pick to see in pro play? Like that minor character you just don't see that often.
I would say probably Kerrigan.
Okay. Awesome. Let's see. This question comes from Maskimus. Actually, no, we're skipping that question because we already asked that question. Sorry about that. So we're on to Quetzal. What are your predictions for Hanzo and Blaze positions in the competitive meta?
I mean, Hanzo is played. But he's like every single time I read through Reddit, I feel people expect him to be first ban, first pick material, and he's just simply not. He is played, but he's not as oppressive as people fear he would be. Blaze, I really don't know. To be absolutely honest, new characters, new heroes, I don't care about up to the point where they appear in scrims.
Okay.
The moment they appear in scrims, I care about a new hero.
Right.
Before I look at them, I go through the talents, I look at the hero itself. But in terms of meta, there's absolutely no point, like in competitive meta.
Right,
not Hero League meta. So in terms of competitive meta, there's absolutely no point to really think too much about it. Blaze seems like a character that we could definitely see. I know that most of the tank players that played him have said a lot of positive things, and they feel that he's going to have his place. How high up? That's something that we have to just find out. We can't possibly predict that yet. So once that we have the first few scrims in where teams are testing the hero out, testing hero combinations on certain maps, then we have a bit of a better idea for that. But before that, usually yeah.
Cool. Okay. This one comes from LiQiuD. My question is about Roskmeg. I have no idea if I said that right. I'm going to go with yes.
Yeah, you did.
Awesome. From Diamond Skin. These new players always intrigue me. How do you think he'll do in Phase 1, especially after making a name for himself playing tanks in Hero League, but moving into the carry role?
He's a pretty fun character. I'm not sure if I would call him shy, but he really didn't really talk a lot at the summit in Europe, and he wasn't really the most social guy. But his team always tried to push him to the front and say, like, no, you interact with people now. I mean, the new players, they can definitely shine. That's definitely a huge opportunity. I think at the beginning, nerfs might play a role for sure. It's definitely different if you're playing in an HGC setup all of a sudden. We had in the past also other players coming in. I mean, we don't know, of course, on the NA side, Kyo, for example, did really well when he started to enter the scene as the Hero League god that he was at that point, and the transition into competitive. We had with Xay, someone playing for TGG just last season. So I can't possibly predict how well he's going to do. I think he's going to be fine. The question is more, how is the team as a whole going to perform there? But I don't think that he's going to completely fall apart or something, or struggle to an extent where he's going to be the downfall of his team. The question is just, can he grow to an extent where he gets even better than he already was in Hero League environment? And I think we have more and more new players pushing in. For a new player, I feel there's always like chances and openings. I mean, by now we have 2 Australians also in the European scene with Arcana and Roba. So it just shows that if you have the talent, you have the skill, you will eventually make your way through.
Okay. And then the last question we have before we jump into
done
our
already?
preview. We are, well, we're done interviewing.
Easy.
We still got to go through our team preview, and I think I might have a couple of hard ones there.
Okay.
But, all right, so what are your thoughts on the map pool change with Warhead coming out and Volskaya being in?
NA RIP?
That hurts.
I can accept that answer, though.
No, I mean, jokes aside, no pro player liked Warhead. I mean, yes, NA had their couple of cheeses and we had a couple of fun games at events, but outside of that, I think it was the map that was hated the most. So the players voted on the maps, and Warhead was the map where some teams actually gambled a little bit because they were hoping for other teams to make sure that Warhead didn't make it in, and they were trying to push other agendas slightly, which was kind of funny. But overall, yeah, Volskaya is better than Warhead. It's a bit more stable, and I have no problems with that. I didn't really have a lot of fun casting Warhead games. There's a few maps in the pool where I personally think, from a caster's perspective, they are not really enjoyable. One of the maps that it's actually interesting because Dread and I always have discussions about that. He loves it. I hate Sky Temple. I think Sky Temple is one of the most boring maps to cast and watch because it feels very, very scripted.
Yes.
So I like it when it's a little bit more dynamic. But overall, no matter what you think about a map like Sky, which I way prefer still over Warhead, Warhead was just this weird volatile thing. The only fun aspect for me of Warhead was really what North America did, where they started to figure out these cheeses and then try to use those. That was actually fun to cast. That was pretty cool. And at BlizzCon, when you, for example, saw the Chinese not doing their homework at all and then get crushed. I mean, that's another thing where I feel it's absolutely ridiculous if you go to the final event of a year and you have literally done apparently like no research because you're not, even after it happened 2 times already, you're not prepared to deal with that.
Right.
To deal with the cheese strategies that a region throws out on a certain map, then you deserve to lose there. So that part was fun. I actually enjoyed that, but I wouldn't want it on a weekly basis.
Okay, well, now that Warhead's out, if you had to pick your least favorite map to cast, which map would that be? Would it be Sky Temple, or is there something in the current pool that you dislike more?
Yeah, pretty much Sky.
Okay.
I don't hate Sky. It's not like I see the map and it's like, oh my god, I like hate casting this map now. But I feel from all the maps that we have in the pool, it's to me personally the least appealing because I think there is not enough dynamic. You always have the first temple phase is usually a split. Then you have the situation at the second temple phase with the bottom temple where it's just like, does a team kill the fountain before the fight starts, or does a team hit level 10 first? And after that, it's always the meta around the boss. It's always a question, okay, do we have a boss fight at some point? Does the team force the boss fight? Yes, no. Do they try to end through the temple? So that's one of the reasons why I personally don't really enjoy Sky Temple as much, but I still think it's a fine map, but I prefer others. So might be that Volskaya at some point is going to take over that spot for me, but I haven't really seen, or obviously I haven't cast games on the map just yet where I can say that. But right now I would probably name Sky. Yeah.
Is there a map not in the pool that you wish was in the pool?
It's okay. You can say Hanamura.
My favorite is Booty Bay. I can't remember what it's actually called now.
Blackheart's Bay.
Yes, Blackheart's Bay.
Yeah. No,
I would never want that in HGC though.
It's definitely not Shidomura. I would actually say that Blackhearts is can be fun. It's weird because it can be really fun, but you can literally have teams that don't fight on the map at all. So if it was be a little bit changed that you are forced to fight occasionally, then I would probably enjoy it more. I casted some really, really cool games on Blackhearts when it was still played in tournaments. I don't really think there's a map that is not in the pool where I say, oh my god, I would so much love to swap that map in. But I think there's a lot of cool things that were done in the past on Blackhearts, but I can absolutely understand why the teams voted out and don't want to play it. So that's more of a, I would probably enjoy casting it, but I am not quite sure it would be the most enjoyable experience for players and maybe also for the audience in the long run.
But I think the missing of the team fights, because you can play that entire map without ever having to fight, is what keeps it. I don't know if tightening that map up would fix that or not, but that's the missing element, I think, for that map. I still like it personally as a player, but I miss the team fights. When you go a whole map and you just, oh, I got my coins, I turn my coins in, look, we're winning, like,
Yeah, I mean, for the longest time I would have said Haunted Mines is something that I could have seen maybe play it there because that has a couple of cool aspects, but I don't really feel that right now it's in a spot where in any competitive environment that would be a fun map to watch or cast or play for that matter. Cool.
Okay. So we've finished all the questions. Now we're going to jump into the EU preview. DB Smiley posts his world ELO ratings typically once a week when the season's going on with where teams rank ELO-wise based on all his formulas that take wins and losses into account. This year he added a media poll, and I have the results up on the screen right now. And we're going to kind of go through where teams finished, where they were in the media poll, and how you think they're going to do in 2018, and go from there. So... number 1 team in the media pool, even though they finished 3rd, or 2nd, I think it was 2nd actually, was Team Dignitas. Had a great showing towards the end of the year. They struggled a little bit, like right after midseason brawl. I think that's where they were struggling a little, and then kind of came on strong right at the end. Bakery, of course, retired. Mene was traded out, and Wubby and Poik have joined the team. They finished 2nd in GCWC, which was amazing with the new roster. How do you are they the team to beat in 2018?
Yeah, I think so. Like, there's a couple of interesting dynamics, I would say, with Dignitas and Fnatic. If you look at raw skill, if you would, for example, rate every single player. I mean, in this case, we're probably going to talk a lot about Fnatic versus Dignitas. So let's just jump right into that. So if you would look at the lineup of Dignitas and you look at the lineup of Fnatic, and you would give every single player on those lineups a skill base between or a skill based on a number between 0 and 10, and you accumulate those, you would definitely end up with Dignitas being the team that has the higher skill player, so to say. So we've seen at GCWC, they already do amazing from a support perspective. Zelia is fantastic, will be on the solo lane. Poik is shining with the team too, now that he's a little bit less nervous, and kind of works well for them. The big question is if they can maintain that throughout the year. Because whereas Fnatic has on a skill level, if you just look at raw numbers, probably takes more so the 2nd spot, they have a really good work ethic. And there's the question if let's say, for example, the teams most of the teams that have made these switches have said from the start, the goal is BlizzCon.
Right.
There was nothing like we need to win the first Western Clash. Of course, the teams still aim for it, but the big goal is always BlizzCon and do well there. So if towards the second half of the year, or maybe even just like the second quarter, if Fnatic with the work ethic in which they're supposed to be a bit superior can at some point rival Dignitas and just like overtake them, that's the big question. I feel we're going to see a pretty big battle throughout the year between the two teams. Dignitas, for me in Europe, is right now the team to beat, but Fnatic is definitely on a level where they can take them down. The question is that balance going to shift, yes or no? Okay. But Dignitas is definitely very, very impressive in the current, like with their current setup.
Well, I'm a huge fan of Wubby's as a solo lane, Wubby as a solo laner. So Dig getting Wubby is, to me, that's a huge move. And with everything else they've done, they definitely look super strong. And speaking of Fnatic, since they were number 2 in the poll, even though they finished 1st in EU, they won like everything last year, short of BlizzCon. They lost Schwimpy, but picked up Bad Benny, and they traded Wubby for Mene, which I think the Wubby for Mene swap surprised a lot of people.
That is also not what happened.
Okay.
So, I mean, I'm not going to go into detail with this. I'm just saying that these theories that people have that there's like one player that was specifically swapped for another, or that someone was lost and someone was picked for both of these teams are absolutely not true. Like, if the teams at some point want to talk about it, that's fine. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just saying that these fan theories that we have out there are all garbage. Okay. I haven't seen a single one that was actually accurate. So let's just, like, Quacknix put out a pretty big statement where he talked about developments of teams in general. Like, people should read through that and get a bit of an idea of what's going on. Sometimes there's no we swap A for B the entire time. Or that teams went in with that mindset and said, like, okay, we do that, then we lost another player, I need to replace him. teams just changed. At that point, most of those teams that we talk about in the top 4 were extremely stable for a long time. Team LiQuiud was all the way up there. Have, of course, now also changed their setup. But at some point, teams just change. And then it's never an A for B trade. It's always a little bit more fluent than that. So right now, that's not something where they said, hey, Mena is better than Wooby.
Right.
It's different positions. It's completely like, if anything, that should say people should talk about traded Bad Benny for Wooby.
All right.
But nobody talks about that. But even that wouldn't be true. So
right.
Bottom line, those fan theories are a little bit weird. But of course, Wooby as a solo laner has been extremely strong, and Fnatic, more so than the new Dignitas setup, had to go through more role swaps. I mean, we have, for example, Quacknix now on the full flex role as well. So him and Mena are shifting around a little bit after they, tried some things out at GCWC, just saying, okay, we want to switch our setup a bit.
Well, I imagine, again, like, I don't know the stories because outsider looking in, but I imagine it's more like we're releasing these 2 players. This is the player pool that's available for us to pick from, and these are the players that we want to sign, not A for B trades.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different scenarios that could have happened. The teams that we see right now, that's what at the end of the day then really did happen. But there were a lot of other variations that were talked through. So there was a lot of other things where players were asked, declined, or names were thrown around. I'm going to give an example from another team. Arcana, for example, had offers at some point from, I think, 5 different teams. Where, or maybe not direct offers, but where 5 different teams were talking about potentially adding Arcana to their roster, because he was at that point extremely flexible. Like, he's been playing a lot of damage, but traditionally he comes from a support role, and so he was in that spot where he said, whatever I have to play, I can fill that. He put in an insane amount of work and time in Hero League to prove to everyone, hey, I am that flexible. So a lot of the teams that needed to fill a certain spot were looking at Arcana and was saying, hey, this is a potential a guy that we can pick up. And once that you pick up a certain player, some others become open. So there was it was not really just like one switch for another. It was like always a little bit of a roller coaster between different teams. What happens when this team picks up that guy, then there's a slot open, this one could take it in. So that's how that usually are. And these guys have been talking about stuff like this for weeks and months at some time. I mean, some of the changes that we saw happening, some of the stuff was initially already discussed at BlizzCon 2016, where they were talking about certain potential changes to be made, and then just said, nah, we're going to stick with our lineup for whatever reason. And then a year later, coming back to the same talking points, do we have to make a change now? Yes, no. So that's how all of that worked out. I don't know of a single team that went in and said, like, yeah, we're kicking this one guy and just like taking another A for B trades. That never happened that way.
Okay.
I do want to defend the wording on that slide. I just took it. I took it from the Dignitas article where they mentioned that Team Dignitas and Fnatic have agreed to a player trade. They will transfer. I took it from that wording.
No, that's true, because the way, again, this is like the way that, for example, when depending on how contracts go, do you have, for example, a team that buys out another player? In that case, teams wanted to just like swap the way that it happened then was that one player from each team wanted to go to the other team, so they could make that trade. I'm not blaming you for that, but I have seen these same wording also like echoed on Reddit a lot, not only with Fnatic and Dignitas, but with other teams as well, where you just get the complete wrong picture if you look at that. So because one of the big things of GCWC, for example, that I've seen is that a lot of people have been talking about, why would you trade Wooby for Mena? That can't work. Now they have to go for a role swap. But it's not that you switched out these two players. As it happened and as the teams overall changed, it happened that one player from each team wanted to play for the other side. So instead of having to go for any kind of buyouts or negotiations or anything, they could make a change.
Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. Speaking of Arcaner, we are up to Expert. I swear I renamed that to Expert, but it still says to be determined. But they made a couple of changes. Bad Benny and ADRD are both now off that team, and Schwimpy and Arcana are now on that team, and they have left the expert name behind. So I guess the real question here is, how will this new look roster really do, and is Arcana going to be able to shine in the EU like he, had the ability to in ANZ?
Right now, I would expect them to be in the top 4.
Okay.
Like, my top 4 are pretty clear, what I would expect for at least until the Western Clash. And that's Fnatic, Dignitas, Team LiQuiD, and Expert.
Interesting. Okay.
Oh, you think LiQuiD's going to skyrocket right back up there?
So those would be currently my assumptions for the top 4. I mean, that can, of course, always change depending on how the team starts into the season. But at this point, from all the changes that were made, how the teams present themselves, I would say if we have a top 4 that fights for those spots again, then that would be the top 4 that I would look at.
Awesome. Okay.
The good news is if EU maintains their current dominant streak against NA, they'll get that extra spot for BlizzCon, so that 4th team can go.
That's true.
Yeah.
Or mid-season brawl in the first time, right? So
I mean, there's always a chance that another team also then just pushes in. Again, This is also not that I'm looking at now scrim games and saying, hey, this team does good against this team, because scrims are training. So you oftentimes do stuff that you then later on are not gonna show in the league itself because you tried it out, didn't really work. So you can't just look at scrim data and say like, okay, this is how it's gonna look like. But from like Team LiQuiD, for example, they feel really good with the new setup. Expert or 2Bs as you have them here as well. We have the situation with Fnatic and Dignitas that was talked out through GCWC now as well. So all 4 of these teams do pretty well, but we have others that also had some very good showing so far and have good practice sessions, feel very confident going into the season. So there's always a good chance that all of a sudden one of them steps it up a little bit and pushes in, and then those predictions are wrong. But right now, from what I see and what I feel from an experience perspective as well, those would be the 4 that I would expect in the top 4. And the team to beat in that sense would probably be Dignitas at this point.
Okay.
For sure.
So we have Zealots, and Zealots came in ahead of LiQuiD and Tricked in the media poll. They made a couple of changes. They now have ADRD and Chris on their team. And losing Poik and Grand Paqueta. I love Zealots. I think this is a really solid team. I want to see them do well, and I'm hoping for them to hit top 4. I just this is one of the questions. Can they maintain that momentum they had towards the end of last year, almost qualifying?
For me, this is also a bit of a question mark. I have to say, this is something that can really work out well, or it can backfire. At that point, I'm not quite sure if they have that synergy yet to make it, let's say, into the top 4, for example. So I would right now say no.
Okay.
But I might be completely wrong on that. And they definitely have potential. If they can if they can get that synergy that they need, they have definitely a talent pool in there that can achieve that. So, but
that's
right
the beautiful
now,
thing about EU right now is like all these teams are relatively close, right? Like there's a lot of them where you can envision a scenario where they end up in that top 3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. After Zealots, we have Tricked Esports. This is all by way of media poll, so everybody keep that in mind. But with Tricked, they made one change. They swapped out Nappy and they brought in Grand Paqueta, and that's really all they changed. They improved a little in phase 2, but then they started to kind of fall off right at the end. Did they fall behind because of an issue with support? Did they fall behind? Did they do enough in the off season?
Tricked, I have no clue. Okay. Because with Tricked, there's always that thing, even during the season when they were starting last season, when they actually were winning so much, sometimes it just didn't make any sense. It's just like they had games where they played they themselves said it. They had games where they played absolutely abysmal, and then the week after they started crushing everyone. So it was just like one of the sentiments that they echoed every single time was that they themselves sometimes just don't know what's going to happen when they start playing. They're like, okay, let's see which team shows up today. So they memed it. The one thing that I love about these guys is they're having fun. They just have a lot of fun with that. And the goal is, of course, to make it to offline events still. But right now, it's going to be interesting to see how they do there, especially since they just keep switching roles every now and then as well, and then the shot calling. And I think it works really well for them and makes them a bit unpredictable. So I wouldn't say that they're going to have to be afraid to drop into one of the Crucible spots, for example, but I'm not quite sure how far they can go.
Okay. And coming in at number 6 in the media poll is Team LiQuiD, who, of course, released Blumby and Darkmock, then picked up Sport Billy and Eternal. You've already said you think they're a top 4 team.
Yeah.
I enjoyed watching them in 2017 Phase 1. They looked amazing. They were always they were a top 3 team. It was Dig, Fnatic, and LiQuiD, not in any order. Those were the top 3. Like, that's just the way it was. And they seemed to struggle towards the end of Phase 1 and then definitely in Phase 2. Hopefully they can. Like, I would love to see them back in the top. One of the things I have always enjoyed about EU is it's like super competitive. And hopefully that's what we're going to get out of Team LiQuiD this time around.
Now, the thing with TL was that at some point, originally when they started to dominate, one of the strengths that they had is that they didn't really have a dedicated shot caller, but they made the decisions as a team on the fly, and they were really good at it too. But that started to turn into a bit of a weakness at some point where they couldn't react fast enough because they had no one that had the final say. And that's one of the reasons why they started to struggle a little bit. And then they talked about trust issues as well, where, of course, if you have a long loss streak and you don't really know what the reason for it is, that it's really difficult to get motivated as a team. And at some point, just like a lot of the harmony and the synergy that you had is just a bit broken. They try to fix that. And, for example, someone that underperformed a bit at the end of last year was Splendor. And one way that was oftentimes explained was that Splendor took over a huge amount of the pressure by trying to be more active as the shot caller and as the leader in game. And that took a bit away from how much he could focus on his own play. Right. And so sometimes they had, I don't know, a late Ancestral can ruin the play. Can ruin the team fight. So now we have Sport Billy in the tank role, and he's also the one that is shot calling for the team, so that takes pressure off Splendor and can get him back into, I mean, he was known as one of the best, if not the best support in Europe for quite some time, so he can focus on that a lot more. Sport Billy has already shown with Diamond Skin how fantastic he can be in the tank role. Once that Diamond Skin made that swap from him into the tank position, they all of a sudden started winning way more and performed way, way better. So he is just in a fantastic spot for himself and for the team right now. He's exactly what Team LiQuiD needed. They have now a tank player that is the shot caller for them, which is the ideal scenario mostly, because as the tank, you're the one to initiate quite a lot of the fights, if it's not the offlaner. So that was getting rid of one of the weaknesses that they had, the lack of a dedicated shot caller, and also putting him into the perfect position where they have the tank. With Eternal, even when they joined Diamond Skin, we always said that he is a player that had in the past sometimes motivational issues that oftentimes hinged on which team he was playing for. But from a perspective of talent, he's insanely good. And I think in this setup now, he can absolutely shine. He's also the second Bulgarian now in the team. So with that, we have, I feel, a very, very well-versed and very flexible lineup, and I think they're going to do really well this season.
Do you think Sport Billy and Splendor are going to quickly find their synergy together? Because so often we see that tank and support, if those two can really click, like the rest of the team, it's easier for them to do what they need to do, because you know you almost have like that second link between the two players.
Yeah. I don't really think that there's an issue. They were really happy with the way that scrims went for them, just from a synergy perspective, how they click, how they talk to each other. And for example, at HGC Summit, when Eternal was also talking about the team, he said like he feels really, really good playing with the guys. they've known each other from before as well. So I don't think they're going to run into any, let's say, personality clashes, for example. That's could be a roadblock. So as I said, I expect them to do really well.
Awesome. Okay. And then into the bottom 2 by media poll, we have Diamond Skin in the number 7 position. They made a number of changes. Sport Billy, Ethernal, and Chris are all gone now, but they picked up Robodoba, Roskmeg, and Darkmach. To me, they're the biggest question mark because they seemed to do well when Sport Billy was in tank, like you mentioned, but now he's gone. So,
I mean, with this many changes, I would say that right now the candidates that are the most likely. Diamond Skin is a little bit rough to tell because they had most of the changes with 3 players now coming in, and then you have, of course, also then Robodoba comes from ANZ, which at the beginning puts a bit more pressure on him since he has to make the move and everything as well. So that's one of the teams where I feel they have potential, but they should be one of the, together with Leftovers, since they just come out of the Open Division, one of the 2 teams that at least at the beginning struggles the most. Okay. Unless they have like an insane start, they have potential to grow and to make that work, but they are also one of the teams that I have the hardest time to judge. So I personally think that they should struggle the most at the start of the season together with Leftovers.
Okay.
They're a really interesting team because it's a fresh start for Darkmach coming off of Team LiQuiuD. It's Robodoba and Roskmeg doing something completely different for them. Do you know if Robodoba's has he made his way to the UK yet? Do you know? I know we had listeners a couple weeks ago when I think it was on the Jay Street episode saying that he hadn't even moved to Europe yet.
Yeah, he is definitely in Europe. He was at the summit as well, and to my knowledge, he lives in the UK now. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right.
And then speaking of Leftovers, they are the final team right now. They won 4 of the 7 EU Open Division Cups and finished top 3 in all 7, defeating Team Good Guys 4-3 in the Crucible last year. Came in, can't make any changes, obviously, because they just rolled in from Crucible at the end of Phase 2. Do we think... We've talked to Lauber on the show. We saw Zealots last year do insanely well for a team that came in through the Open Division. We saw Team Good Guys not do as well as Zealots. Do you have a gut feeling is Leftovers like following one of those 2 paths? Is it going to be somewhere in the middle?
For them, one of the reasons why I said I feel that they are also going to be one of the teams that's going to struggle a little bit more towards the beginning is that while they are practicing a lot right now, I think this is also the moment where you realize, okay, this is very different from Open Division. Because because you just like you have to scrim on a regular basis, you have a completely different rhythm,
right.
And at the beginning there's going to be pressure on them that other teams that have been in HGC before don't experience to that level yet. There's of course also a lot where they want to prove themselves. LiQiuD has talked about this a few times that he now wants to show in HGC how good of a player he actually is. That is a huge motivation, but at the same it's also a bit of extra pressure that you put on your shoulders.
Right.
They're definitely really talented players. We have with Lauber one of the best ETC players for sure. So they can be really good, and I think they have also a lot of potential to grow here. I would still expect them to struggle a bit at the beginning of the season. I would think for them, the first objective really has to be just make sure that you don't end up in the Crucible. So we could see a pretty big battle in the bottom 4 as well, just to make sure that the teams are getting out of the Crucible ranks. And for them, of course, I think they are starting off against Fnatic, if I'm not mistaken. It's, of course, right away a pretty tall order.
Right.
But maybe not necessarily the worst start for them, because it's a game that everybody expects them to lose anyways. And if that's then the first game where you can get a little bit of experience how the process of HGC games work,
right,
that's probably a good thing to just get a bit of experience without having the pressure that you feel afterwards. Okay, maybe we already ruined our season because we lost to a potential direct competitor. So I think once that they get a little bit of confidence, once that they're familiar with the rhythm, they can probably surprise people. But I think right now for them, it's trying to gather experience as fast as they can and just get on the level where they're saying, okay, now we're playing on eye level with these guys.
Okay.
Yeah, I just took a sneak peek at their schedule for week 1. Friday, they open up against LiQuiD. And then on Sunday, they play Fnatic. So that is a rough start to your HGC career.
All right.
Don't they have Dignitas pretty early in the season
I think
as well?
Week 3, I think they have Dignitas.
There's one team that is absolutely screwed, if I remember correctly. Because the schedule came out, I don't know exactly if it was at the summit, but we looked at it, and there's one team that is definitely completely screwed at the start of the season. It has like all the heavy hitters right away. It was pretty brutal. I can't remember on the top of my head, but yeah.
I'm actually going to look.
Now we're all looking, right?
Right? That's how it works.
I think it was just about the first weekend, I think. But yeah, so they have the first weekend is going to be interesting for them. I would say that the performance against LiQuiD is, for me personally, more interesting than anything else. That's, of course, also one of the things where these teams don't scrim against each other. So that's another reason why you don't have direct comparison between how they are going to do or any kind of like data on that. So it's going to make things a little bit more interesting. But yeah.
Yeah, so they Leftovers does have Dig in week 3. They go LiQuiD Fnatic in week 1, and then Tricked in week 2, and Dig in week 3. So yes, that's I
mean, it's a round robin schedule, so they all have to play each other. And EU it's a tough region, so there are no easy outs.
Yeah, but do you really want them all in the first 3 weeks? Probably not.
More or less. Yeah.
All right, but that's our EU preview. And that's actually it. That's all we have tonight. Thank you, Khaldor. We really appreciate you being on the show. And talking EU with us. Thank you all for listening to Trollin HGC, a weekly podcast about Heroes of the Storm eSports, a member of the Trolls.gg Entertainment Network. We stream live our Twitch channel, twitch.tv/TrollsGG, every week, Tuesdays at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific. Khaldor, on top of where can people find you, do you have any shout outs you want to give?
That one catches me off guard, even though it's the most predictable one of all of them. I think for follow is just like Twitter at Khaldor. Shout outs, nothing on the top of my head, to be honest.
Okay.
I'm just happy that we're back with HGC. I want to be in the studio again. It's only 2 more days, and that's going to be awesome. So 1 more days of watching scrims, and then they go finally up against each other. The break has been too long, so I'm happy when it all starts again. And yeah, it's going to be fun. Going to be fun joking around with Trixler again. So yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. And thanks to you guys, of course, for having me.
Absolutely. Bahgz, where can people find you?
Guys, you can follow me on Twitter at BahgzHGC. You can watch me stream on twitch.tv/Bahgz. As well, if you enjoyed tonight's show and are interested in Blizzard's other esports offerings, consider subscribing to the Weekly Blizz, where my buddy Gwaz and I cover all of Blizzard esports and can be found on all podcast sources. LiQuiD, where can people follow you?
So the best place to follow me is on Twitter at LiQuiudGG. That's LiQiuDGG. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, chat. Thank you, Reddit. I know that seems weird to say, but thank you for the questions. We always enjoy getting questions from you guys. Thank you all our Patreon supporters. And if you're looking for other ways to support us, subscribe on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher. Leave us a review. We're always looking for those. You can visit our website, www.trolls.gg, read articles. There's an EU HGC article that's supposed to be up, I think, this week. Check out all our old videos. All linked in the same place. If you want to get in touch with us, the best way is Twitter at Trollin HGC, or you can email us, trollin@trolls.gg. Again, thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, Bahgz, as always, and thank you, Khaldor, for joining us on the show.
Pleasure.
Everybody have a great night, and we'll see you in the Nexus.
Peace out.